it is hard for me to believe personally that this is the 13th year we have held the Mayor's Development Roundtable. And I still remember with some level of excitement the first one. Mayor Humphreys was hosting it. I was on the city council. And I remember just thinking to myself, I was receiving information that I wasn't able to get really anywhere else. It was available in bits and chunks to different audiences, but it didn't seem to be available to me. And so as we have grown the Mayor's Development Roundtable, I hope you'll appreciate that that's really what we're trying to accomplish today. We're really trying to express as much information about what's going on in Oklahoma City, hoping that it will spark an idea with you. I love the idea that we can have real estate investors, bankers, developers, architects, engineers, all in the room at the same time. And we have purposely put in a little bit of space and time for you all to congregate in the hallways. And it's, of course, my hope that you all will put some deals together while you're out there and we can keep this incredible economy going. With that, I think we ought to just get it going. We are extremely pleased to have two visiting speakers here coming in from out of town. Our first kickoff keynote presenter is retired chief planner for the city of Vancouver, Larry Beasley. He is now, and get this title, he is the Distinguished Practice Professor of Planning at the University of British Columbia, as well as he has his own company. He's Beasley and Associates, which is an international planning consultancy. He has studied architecture and has degrees in geography and political science. He has been awarded 2 honorary doctorate degrees from Simon Fraser University and from Dalhousie University. He is a member of the Order of Canada, his country's highest civilian honor for lifetime achievement. In recognition of his national service, he has been awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. He actually flew into our city on Sunday, so he has had time to kind of walk around and look around and see some of the things we've accomplished, and we look forward to hearing what he thinks about our livability, our sustainability. So please welcome to me from the city of Vancouver, Larry Beasley.
Your Worship, thank you for that opening introduction. I should tell you that's a fake professorship. It has a big title, but there's not much to it, actually. I had the pleasure of coming in early. I've been here since Saturday night, actually, and Sunday I walked 7.5 hours. Monday I was taken on a tour and I walked a couple more hours. Yesterday I walked a couple more hours. I'm getting a flavor for the city. And what really has affected my thinking is how progressive and forward Oklahoma City is when I compare you to many other parts of the country and frankly other cities in the world. It was amazing to me to see here one of the best public realm programs, improvements to the public realm that I've seen in any country, in any city in America. It's a beautiful public realm. As a matter of fact, I was telling everyone that I'm going to take the pictures back to my city and shame them into doing a better job because the public realm here is beautiful. The botanical garden is beautiful, and the audacity of doing this new Central Park and developing then around that is just amazing. Well, I'm going to talk today about livability and sustainability. And I'm sure that every single serious urban leader in America knows that this is increasingly the big agenda of cities if they want to really shake off the negativity of the past and position their city for a much better future. And these are themes that I saw in the last few days that are being embraced here in Oklahoma City, way ahead of many other cities. So I do want to talk about that agenda today. First thing this morning, I want to remind you of why these are urgent matters. I want to offer you a compelling framework for how these imperatives can be brought together into a proactive planning agenda with real proactive, practical solutions. And then I want to suggest a new kind of perspective than you normally see certainly among public officials, that I found to be much more effective than the traditional way of looking at planning and economic development. And this will be, in my short presentation first thing this morning, a kind of a preamble to my second presentation later, where I'm going to use Vancouver, my city, as a case in point to show you how some of these ideas can, in fact, come together on the ground to make a real city, to make a lovable city. Now, I've been asked to look at Oklahoma City from the perspective of my city, Vancouver, where, especially at the core, we did have to tackle many of the same issues that you are facing today. We had to do it earlier, about 25 years ago. But you might ask, to start, why would the experience of Vancouver be relevant? Well, the reason is that human settlements are very diverse. I love this example from the Netherlands. But underlying those settlements are some basic urban principles that do seem to stay more or less the same. The setting of the cities may be quite different, but the structural imperatives are becoming quite similar in cities around the world. So good ideas, like this great one with a little grocery store in the heart of the city, are quite transferable across city. Tested experience is quite transferable. Many of the cities of the world end up being very, very different from one another, but in fact, underlying that, they are very much, in principle, the same. Here's the example from Abu Dhabi, which you would think would be terribly different from Oklahoma City, but actually it has many, many similarities. But let's start by remembering the recent history of North American cities. And this is not a pleasant history. This image, I think, is a perfect illustration of the fact that cities after the war, contrary to what we all thought would happen, we were all very optimistic, cities, and especially core cities, started to fall apart. They experienced a kind of decline, and huge areas then were left fallow, or they were left underutilized. They became dangerous. They became valueless. From a city point of view, they became taxless. And after trying all kinds of different projects, none of which turned out to be very good solutions, we realized that we had to start to repopulate our cities. We realized that the only way that we could revive our cities was to really bring people back, and to bring them back by the tens of thousands. We realized that we had to do this not just to say to people, come back and work, but also to say to people, come back and live in the place on a 24-hour basis. Come back and invest yourself. Bring your money, bring your political energy, bring your clout, bring your economic demand, bring your job creation. And that's what we started to do in Vancouver back in the 1980s. And this is where really livability becomes a very important issue. And the reason for that is that we haven't done a very good job in the post-war years at making inner cities very livable or very appealing. I think this example, which is a post-war example, or here is an example in your own city, it's not really the preferred option for most citizens. The old style of developing Vancouver, here's some examples from my own city. There's really nothing to write home about. We found that quality livability, changing that to better architecture, better design, is no longer a luxury. We found that it has become a real necessity to make your city a very strong destination. And that's because in the entire world, people have become footloose. People and capital can move around at will anywhere in the world. Business can be done anywhere. Other aspects of people's lives are a lot more important to them than just their livelihood. And where people choose to live is just not tied down the way it used to be. We can do or be almost anything, anywhere. So by the millions, literally the millions around the world, people are escaping from polluted places, frightening places, dull places, to real quality places, places that really make them happy. And it's really as simple as that. This is the underlying reason in a widely, strongly consumer-based society. People really want that kind of fulfillment. And the bottom line of all this is that the quality of place now is, in fact, one of the strongest dimensions of economic development. Now we have started to add sustainability into that equation. We have to all struggle everywhere in the world with sustainability. Every city has to build new constituency, new consumer demand for different kinds of living patterns and forms that'll give us a fighting chance to be compatible as we move forward with the natural environment. Let there be no confusion. It is, in fact, human settlements all over the world that have placed us in harm's way. You might say that sustainability is survival. But in a way, I find that all too scary, and actually there's probably a lot of people in this room would even debate what I'm saying. I think the bigger definition of sustainability is a much more interesting one. It's not just about the environment and protecting ourselves from an upcoming disaster. It's also about economic and social success that builds upon itself and is added to the environmental objective. And I think that's something that we all can embrace, that we can all put our minds around. So livability and sustainability are really very fundamental ideas for the regeneration of modern cities. But how do you turn that into everyday action? Well, it starts with this formula. It's commonly called the smart growth formula, and it's about both the urban structure and the urban infrastructure of your community. From a structural point of view, it's about the form of your community, clustering density and mixed use, not just high density, by the way, but all levels of density, and all kinds of diversity, and then protected open space, such as this lovely space that I just enjoyed the day before yesterday. And it's also about the fabric of our cities, green construction. From an infrastructure point of view, mostly it's about the circulation within our communities, transportation choices that really allow the private car, but puts the private car into a logical array of different movement alternatives that includes transit and also includes, and especially includes, walking. It's about the social and community and cultural facilities that really support the people and that bring stability to communities. I was thrilled to see that here you are developing a new elementary school downtown, way ahead of what other cities are trying to do. And then finally, it's about the utilities in our communities. Increasingly, it's about managing water and waste and energy in a conserving way. And then locally accessing inputs to build the city and to manage the city, especially and increasingly food. And what really fascinates me about this formula is that it seems to work for many of the challenges that we face in modern life. Of course, you know, there are a lot of testimonials to how urgent and important it is to the environmental problems. That's why it was invented in the first place. But I think Jane Jacobs and Richard Florida have also illustrated that this is a very, very smart economic formula for prosperity. Particularly that aspect of diversity, which gives robustness and a kind of an ability to cope with change. Larry Frank, a professor at the University of British Columbia, has done extensive research in cities all over North America to show it's also the right formula for addressing the very endemic health problems, especially focused around obesity, that are sweeping our countries and making it very difficult to achieve the kind of health standards that we should be able to achieve almost better than anyone in the world. And I think the same can actually be said about dynamic culture and social integration. I would even go as far as to say national ingenuity. I may be pushing it a bit there, but it is interesting to note that all of these things come together in the same city lens. So this is a very useful formula from which to start thinking about how you would reshape your city in the future. Now, having said that, I think we also have to pause, and we have to ask a very simple question. Is the public really with us in all this? Will they change their life patterns and habits to embrace the kind of city that this represents? Now, I often hear planners say, well, you know, people are simply going to have to do things differently in the future. They will have no choice. And they usually add, especially with oil peak prices happening, it'll just be impossible to stay with those existing patterns. But you know, is that really true? Think about it. We all live in a very free society. We have guaranteed personal freedoms. We will listen. We'll listen to all kinds of things, but we're going to do whatever we want to do. And people are wealthier than they've ever been, so you know what? They can buy the lifestyle that they prefer, that they choose. Now, frankly, I'm not too worried about things like green construction and alternative infrastructure, as long as we have informed governments and responsible developers, which I think by and large you see in a city like Oklahoma City and many other cities in America, because people don't actually make personal choices on these aspects. We kind of accept the housing and the utilities, the buildings that are offered to us at whatever level we can afford, and that's the end of the story. But what about density? What about mixed use? What about diversity? What about active transportation? These are things that people do make very direct personal decisions about. And frankly, most consumers in the English-speaking world, at least, have shown very little interest to be a part of the kind of city that we would talk about from that smart growth model. As one very sardonic Canadian mayor has said, the only thing that the public hates more than sprawl is actually intensification. You know, let's be blunt about it. People hate density because most of it has been done so poorly over the years. They think of mixed use as probably hitting them negatively. They look at diversity as probably unsafe. And, you know, transit isn't really in a lot of people's, even their vocabulary, their very consciousness. You have to remember that over 70% of us in this country and in my country still prefer non-urban choices, 70%. And that's with all the revivals that we've had going on in our core city. Let me just do a bit of a survey here in the room today. Raise your hand if the following applies to you. How many people in this room live at medium or high density? Look around. How many of you live in a mixed-use building? There's a couple of hands there, including the mayors. I embrace you for that, Your Worship. How many of you have low-income people right next door? A few more hands. I'm not going to ask you how many of you travel more than 30 minutes to work or how many of you own an SUV. I hope I make my point. Even we, and I include myself here, we who are the urbanists, who are the developers, who are the civic managers, and who, by virtue of that, are really probably the most committed in society, we are often in a state of personal contradiction between our theories and our consumer practices. So, what can we expect of the average person? But to some degree, I can understand the average person. I sympathize with their predicament because these communities that we have been building since the war have very seldom offered anything that would be very appealing for us in terms of a dense or even a modestly dense mixed-use urban experience. I mean, really, could you get excited about living in that? Or worse than that? I mean, I don't think so. And we have to change that. And I think we can change that by adding one essential missing component to that formula of smart growth that I presented a few minutes ago, and that is placemaking. We have to again start to really design our communities. We have to start to embellish our communities and to bring back into our communities the human touch and the human scale. If we can build cities that really do appeal to people, yes, let's make sure that they have density and they have diversity and they are walkable. But let's go further than that. Let's give them that wow factor. Let's make sure that they are exciting places, that they are stylish places, that they are supportive places, that they have real soul. Let's make them so good. Then I think people will naturally start to choose them. You'll see people making them a true attraction, and they will then start making spontaneous changes to their behavior and making the personal choices that automatically go in the right direction. And this is really where you see that those urban objectives of sustainability and livability come very close together. And this approach is really driven by the imperative to tap into people's emotional response to the city and their neighborhood and their home. I actually call this experiential urbanism. Learning about and then delivering the direct, tangible experiences that people tell us they want in their lives and for their families and for their children every day. These become the genetic fragments from which then the urban patterns are built up, layer upon layer, to create the city of the future. And this has two fundamental aspects. The first is that it takes a consumer focus to really define what needs to be done from the consumer perspective in the creation of our cities, and then it takes an urban design focus at a very basic level to then realize those consumer hopes and expectations. In planning and managing our cities, we tend to think of people first and foremost as citizens, as a group of people, and we develop a lot of policies and rules, a lot of laws for the group. But the experiential approach that I'm talking about requires you to start thinking about people as individual consumers and put a lot of attention on the intimate things that touch people spiritually as well as functionally and that really determine their moment-to-moment consumer choices. The consumer trends are way more powerful than any law that we could put together. Things like character are very important. Things like comfort, the visceral response of the senses to the city, caprice, the beauty of the unexpected. And this is all about enticements and attractiveness, positive targets. This is about the carrot, not the stick. This requires, of course, public engagement and research to truly understand what people need and want without a political agenda, but it also requires a transactional process at City Hall between developers and citizens and city forces to get the right things to happen and to make them happen as development occurs. But the really most important thing is that this is about that physical design, using actual urban design to make the city what it needs to be for consumers, to be able to transform consumer expectations to something different and something greater. The quality city does not happen by accident. It has to be very carefully designed. You know, modern people are very savvy about design. Look at everything that you consume on a day-to-day basis. Look at the Apple computer. And yet most of the contemporary city is not actually designed at all. It's just laid out according to standards and rules and regulations that have something to do with something, but they don't have anything to do with what the consumer might care about. In fact, we often even wipe out what the consumer cares about and cherishes as we apply these rules. And it's all very utilitarian. Here are buildings that are not designed by architects. Here's a public space not designed by a landscape architect. Here's a building not involving public artists. This is the kind of layout that we really do in our cities today. And we have to get away from that. It's very boring. People do not want to be in these places. We have to again put the stamp of deliberate design on everything that composes the city of the future. We have to bring the great prowess of our design community, our architects and our landscape architects, back to the task of building the city that we actually want to create for people. We want to create of a type that would make people interested, that would get people excited, that would be chic, that would be hip, that people would want to invest in, that people would want to live in, that people would want to do for an entire lifetime, not just an early time in the beginning of their lives. And my message in all of this is that the future of cities rests more than ever before on people and more people. And a smart regeneration strategy will be about events and all those things, but mostly it will be about repossessing the city for people. We'll do that by recreating the city in their image and with their collaboration. And we'll do it through a deliberate and pervasive act of design. Now, later this morning, I'm going to show you some of the results of a strategy that has been based on livability and increasingly sustainability. It's a fait accompli. It exists. The pictures are there for you to see and to judge for yourself. And I'm going to cover some of the themes that are integral to that. And this is going to be a story about urban transformation of a big scale that is profitable, that is valuable, that is efficient for both government and the private sector, but as much as anything, that is beautiful and sociable and humane and offers really in and of itself a complete and rich community life for people every day. And I think that's very relevant here in Oklahoma City, given what I've seen in the last few days, and I look forward to that conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, I'd say that had the wow factor. Thank you very much, Larry. We're excited to bring back the 2020 Lightning Round for a fourth year and to focus on the next generation of development here in Oklahoma City. Today, 4 young entrepreneurs share their innovative spirit and sense of community, and I think you'll see from their projects that they really are engaged in placemaking and that their projects are making Oklahoma City the kind of place all of us want to be for a very long time. They'll give us a glimpse of their projects through 6-minute and 40-second presentations, so don't blink or you'll miss something. Up first to present 20 slides set at 20 seconds each in this lightning-style round is the founding principal and partner with Wayne Property Advisors, a development and brokerage firm focused on creating and facilitating urban infill projects. Please welcome from Wayne Property Advisors, Ben Sellers.
Our first redevelopment project was this 2-story office building at Northwest 23rd and Dewey. Constructed in 1964 for the National Cash Register Company, it served as their local offices for more than 2 decades, then passed through a handful of investor owners before we purchased it in 2011. This is what it looks like today, but it was much different when we bought it. It was functioning as an office building with a few tenants, but it was very ugly. There was a nice combination of mirrored and purple auto tint on the windows. Some of the interior walls were exposed concrete block, very industrial, but not in the cool, hip way. It had significant mechanical and plumbing problems, and the original freight elevator was frightening to use. Overall, it was a very uninspiring place to be. At the time, I didn't know what the end product could be, but I knew the building would be a great place and make a positive impact on 23rd Street. But based on what it looked like then, convincing the bank and the appraiser of this turned out to be a little more difficult than expected. The appraiser actually told me I was crazy if I thought I would get retail tenants in this building. In spite of its condition, the building has some great features. It was set back from the street to allow for a great patio. It had its own parking lot at the rear of the building, and it had 90 feet of storefront glass facing 23rd. One of the first improvements we made was adding the patio. At the time, the street frontage was being used as office space, and we had no retail prospects. We took the approach, if you build it, they will come. We began making improvements to the exterior that people would notice. This was a key decision for us for 2 reasons. This was our first project, and we did not have a track record for people to believe that we would do what we said we would. And second, there were no comparables for what we were wanting to do. We had to set the market. We could not wait for a retail lease to be in place before we started renovations. We had to start making improvements to attract the retail tenants we wanted. 23rd Street was a much different place than 3 years ago. Most potential retailers and lenders were reluctant to invest here, but in just a short time, that perception has shifted, and it's hard to find someone that can't see the future potential of 23rd Street. So we did the patio, we repaired the canopy, and we started replacing the windows with the new storefront glass system and operable upper windows that matched the style of the original ones. As we did this, we began getting inquiries from some national restaurant chains and ultimately struck a deal with Orange Leaf Frozen Yogurt. We liked Orange Leaf because there weren't any similar concepts on 23rd Street. Orange Leaf's corporate offices were here in Oklahoma City, and the franchisees of this store lived in the neighborhood. They were truly committed to the success of this location. Shortly after we finalized the Orange Leaf deal, we did the same with Pizza 23. And again, Pizza 23 was a local established group with Joe's Famous Pizza locations in Edmond, Northwest Oklahoma City, and Purcell. At this point, we were pretty proud of ourselves for landing new retail tenants, but this posed a new set of problems. We had 3 office tenants that had to be relocated upstairs. Fortunately, we had the space to accommodate this, and had already began upgrading flooring, lighting, and finishes on the 2nd level. 2 of our office tenants were thrilled about this option, but 1 was not very happy about it, and they chose to quit paying rent, and unfortunately, they're no longer with us. But we continued on and completed the replacement of the freight elevator with a top-of-the-line, EcoBoost, energy-efficient passenger elevator that hopefully one day will make financial sense. 3 years of hard work later, I'm proud to say that we are 100% occupied with our newest tenant, This Land Yoga, moving in last month. In the same time period, several other restaurants have opened and major redevelopment is underway in the district. And I'm happy to announce that our next project will also be in Uptown 23rd. Our next project is a 1920s era 6-unit apartment building. Located at the corner of Northwest 23rd and Robinson, it's been boarded up for several years and currently homes some of the city's local homeless population. This is a key intersection leading into Uptown 23rd District and is also very important to Jefferson Park neighborhood to the north. And while it's historically been used as residential, zoning allows for commercial uses, and we are currently working through different potential new uses for the property and how the neighbors might be impacted by these potential uses. This will likely become office and retail space. The final project I'll discuss today is the new construction infill development. These are conceptual renderings of a mixed-use project we are in the early planning stages of. There will be 20 residential units above 2,000 square feet of retail space. This design is unique because it involves a podium construction on a small scale, which allows for all of its residential and commercial parking needs to be met on site. All of the residential units will be on the second and third levels with parking behind the retail and underneath the residential. In addition to having outdoor patio space on the street for the commercial tenant, it will also feature great outdoor common areas for residents to hang out and interact, and each of the residential units will have windows on at least 2 sides to maximize natural lighting. And what I think is the coolest feature, it will have secured bike storage for residents that doubles as a tornado shelter. This is a project that we'll be working with area stakeholders and the neighborhood associations to work through rezoning issues and make sure the project complements and positively contributes to the neighborhood. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Ben. Our next lightning round presenter is founding principal and partner of 308 Design, which is helping to design and develop the new look of both residential and commercial realty in our city. Please join me in welcoming David Wanzer.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, and thank you for having me today. Today, I'll be showcasing 3 residential and 3 commercial development projects. My first jump into development has been in the urban neighborhood of Meadowbrook Acres, located at Northwest 56th and 57th Street along the Western Avenue corridor. This neighborhood was platted in the 1920s with only 3 blocks as a country getaway neighborhood close to Belle Isle Lake and Amusement Park, and sat at the end of the classic trolley line. It is now only 2 blocks wide and surrounded on 2 sides by the Rand Elliott designed and Chesapeake developed Class and Curve. It is a very walkable community with multiple restaurants, retail shops, and Whole Foods all within 3-block radius. To date, we have purchased approximately 20% of the lots in this small neighborhood. 4, a modern micro-community, was our first development in this neighborhood, and we completed it 2 years ago on Northwest 56th Street. We were also the designer and general contractor on the project. It consists of 4 2,100 square foot single-family, fee simple, detached homes, all built on a small 100 by 175 foot lot. With support from the Neighborhood Association and our planning commissioner, we rezoned the land with an SPUD to allow for the extra density, the tighter setbacks, and smaller lot sizes. We broke ground in 2010, 100% sold out. Our homeowners are a combination of research scientists, physicians, and attorneys. 4 was designed with the idea of creating community for the inhabitants and with the neighborhood. All homes share a central shared driveway that encourages random interaction between the neighbors. Balcony spaces and private outdoor courtyards provide a constant connection to the outdoors. Exterior materials consisted of brick, cement fiberboard, and Zalmag metal panels. The exterior steel trellis is designed to block the harsh summer sun while allowing warmer winter sun to come into the spaces. Interiors are very modern, light-filled, and open, with operable windows allowing for natural cross-ventilation. There's an open living, dining, kitchen area on the first floor with bamboo or concrete floors, and a cozy reading nook is tucked underneath the stairs. Upstairs is a master suite and a bathroom, along with 2 additional flex rooms, a 3rd bathroom, and a laundry room. My wife and I live in one of the homes, and amazingly enough, I'm still friends with all of the neighbors and my buyers, despite the fact that I designed, developed, and built the project. Our next project in the neighborhood, 2x2, is currently under construction on Northwest 57th Street, backing up to the Class and Curve. Similar to our original project, it is a 4 single-family detached small lot, 2,300 square foot homes with a central shared drive. While it has similar site plans, the architecture and floor plans are completely different from our 4 project. The material palette is brick and redwood siding. Programming is similar with an open living, dining, kitchen downstairs, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths upstairs, lots of connection to the outdoors through ample windows and sliding glass patio doors. These homes are slated to be completed by late 2014 to early 2015. The next project that we are preparing to break ground on in Meadowbrook Acres is called Side by Side. This is a departure from the double lot 4-house concept and instead consists of 2 2,100 square foot, 2-story townhomes on a 50 foot by 125 foot lot. Both homes include balcony spaces on the front and the back, as well as a private rear courtyard. We'll be breaking ground on that project this month. Shifting gears now to some of our commercial development work, 1732 Northwest 16th Street Also known as Blair's Upholstery, is a 4,500 square foot building that's in the heart of the 16th Street Plaza district. This is one of the last buildings along the 16th Street commercial strip to be renovated and was formerly home to Dorothy Haggard's Furniture and Blair's Upholstery. We removed the wooden false front to reveal a beautifully intact 1920s commercial style building with great masonry and cast stone detailing, along with perfectly intact transom windows that have been covered up inside and out for decades. We are completing a full gut rehab on the building and targeted 2 specific tenants that have both signed leases. Oak and Oar, a craft beer bar and restaurant, along with Roxy's Ice Cream Social, will both open up later this summer. Oak and Oar is a new concept from owner and craft beer aficionado Micah Andrews, while Roxy's is an extremely popular Oklahoma City food truck ran by husband and wife team Raina and Shane Moots, and they will be opening their flagship location in the Plaza District. Main Street Arcade building is located at 629 West Main Street. It's an amazing 30,000 square foot, 2-story building built in the 1920s. According to an ad to attract investors in the Oklahoman, it was designed to house a series of, quote, little shops and fraternal lodges. While it did house a series of small businesses throughout the years, it was best known as the home of the Downtown Baptist Church and Hills Business College. We are in the process of adding the building to the National Register of Historic Places, making it eligible for crucial tax credits. Our plan is to perform a complete rehab of the building starting in the 4th quarter of this year, and we will actively begin recruiting tenants within the next couple of months. We will be targeting office tenants for the upstairs, and true to its original intentions, we'll be looking to curate a mix of 6 to 8 ground floor retail tenants, anchored by 2 restaurant and cafe tenants. We are very excited about the possibility of bringing retail back to Main Street in Oklahoma City, and believe this building to be a critical component towards the complete revitalization of the West Main Street corridor. The Sliver, located at 718 West Sheridan on Film Row, is a 5,500 square foot building and is comprised of the original 25 foot by 130 foot Sliver building and a new 2,200 square foot perpendicular second story. The project was conceived of 7 years ago when I told Chip Fudge that we would like to, quote, purchase the ugliest building on the block from him and turn it into our permanent home on Film Row. With patience and help from Chip, the project was ultimately co-developed by myself, Bootser Gardner Architects, and Obelisk Engineering, and designed by Bootser Gardner Architects. We all co-own the building and office on the ground floor in an open, collaborative work environment. The interior space was purposely left raw and exposed to highlight the construction and materials. The Corten-clad exterior is a modern juxtaposition against the historic fabric of other Film Row buildings. We creatively used air rights over the parking lot to build the second-story lease space that is currently being built out for a small law firm, making the building 100% complete. So what's next? We have several new concepts in the work for our other lots of Meadowbrook Acres. We also own almost 2 acres consisting of various lots and buildings located throughout the Midtown area and have several projects on the boards that we look forward to sharing with you soon. Thank you for having me today. It has been my honor.
Thank you, David. I think by now you can see that one of the common threads throughout our lightning round this morning is a commitment to developing community and not just developing land. Our next lightning round presenter shares that same commitment. He's Senior Vice President of Newmark, Grubb, Levy, Strange, Beffort, and one of the next generation of developers who are committed to making this city even better. Andy Burnett.
Good morning. So I'm going to take as much time as possible over the next 6.5 minutes naming as many names as possible, because without the help of a lot of people, most of my projects would have never come together. From bankers to mentors to City Hall to Tim Strange, I have been very blessed to be surrounded by people that I genuinely enjoy living life with. And those people have made me much better at what I do. The first person I wanted to mention with that regard is my brother David. David and I like to broker very pretty properties. We like to buy properties that are usually falling down. From a foreclosed putt-putt course in Edmond that we converted to a House Smith restaurant called The Garage, to the Midikey building in Bricktown. We like hard deals because that's where we find you can find opportunity and you can also hopefully do some community good. So the first property that we bought in Bricktown was called the Stuart Metal site. It was an 8-acre property in East Bricktown that had a lot of problems. I was having lunch with Russell Klaus, and Russell told me about the availability of some federal stimulus funds called NSP3. Brett Price in my office had been trying to sell this site for quite a while. We approached him with a contract. Matt Gabrielson, Leslie Batchelor, and Okura stepped in and were tremendous in helping us navigate a lot of the legal challenges that we would face in pursuing those funds. Were not for them and their creativity, this deal would have never come together. I realized fairly quickly though, that this project was outgrowing me, and I needed a wingman. I had just sold the SIA portfolio to Gary Brooks, and Gary Brooks was a good buddy, and I really liked the way that he treated people. Gary agreed to come in as a 50% partner and really help run the show. We paid $4.5 million for the site, and today I would tell you we paid about $4.6 million too much. You name it, we have found it on this site. Contaminated groundwater, metals in the soil, abandoned oil wells, 3 storm sewers that are dissecting the site, 2 of which you can literally drive a car through. The city's Brownfield office and DEQ have been very, very good in helping us clean this site up. Because we're in Bricktown, brick will obviously play a very large role in our design. Well, I'll point out this slide. This slide, what you see in the background is our site covered in oil wells, if that gives you any indication of what we're dealing with. Because we're in Bricktown, as I was saying, brick will play a very large role in our design. We want to implement a little bit more of a modern, cool, hip feel, and we're trying to do that with the Bricktown Design Review in a way that they're going to be happy with us. Blair Humphreys is a very good buddy of mine, and he's been preaching placemaking and walkability for a long time. We're listening to his ideas, and we're trying to implement those into our design. We want this property to have that urban street wall feel that we all love so much in properties in New York and Portland. And we're trying to do that with this courtyard that Gary and his team have helped us design. When we finish, we'll have 375 apartments, 20,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space, and we'll use a HUD 221 D4 loan on the project. The next property that I bought downtown was the vacant and abandoned Century Center Mall with Steve Hurst, Mark Moore, and the Nazarian family. This property was charming in a very ugly kind of way, but we loved the property's location in the heart of downtown. Our original plan with this building was to put the Bob Moore Auto Group on 2 and lease out 1 to a grocery store. A couple of days after closing, I was having coffee with Steve Lackmeyer, the omniscient Steve Lackmeyer. And Steve mentioned what a great fit a Pubco would be for the Century Center. Steve pointed out how similar our floor plan was at the Century Center to the floor plan of the New York Times. Steve believed that in order for the paper to continue to stay relevant and hip, they needed to move back downtown. Well, Mark Beffort, who offices just down the hall from me, albeit in a much larger office, at this time was selling Pubco's corporate headquarters and was also acting as their tenant rep. After many meetings with Mark, Tim Strange, Steve Hurst, Wiley Williams, and a lot of other people that helped us pull this deal off, our deal finally came together. So part of our original plan included adding 2 floors of parking, around 400 parking spots. You can see on the top of this garage, though, those 2 little round heliclines. Well, apparently it's very expensive to add on to those, and that's one of the things that I did not realize going into this project. Threw our budget out of whack, and we had to scrap that from our plan. Chris Dunning came through big time for us in helping us procure financing with Stillwater National Bank. Both of them were great to deal with. One of Butzer Gardner is going to be our architect. I think that they've designed a very cool, hip, modern space. One of the things that was important to a Pubco was the use of a lot of glass to symbolize transparency. We wanted this space to be much more interactive with the street than the concrete walls that you see there today. I believe, and Steve Hurst believes, that this block is very important to the overall image of the city due to its proximity to the convention center, the downtown park, and the Devon Tower. Steve Hurst and Mark Moore are both very passionate about making Oklahoma City a better place to live. And I think that this project is just another small piece to that overall puzzle that all of us are working on. The final building I'm going to talk about is in Bricktown. So Zach Martin and I have been brokering buildings in Bricktown for the past 7 years, and we've always loved the idea of developing the upper floors of those buildings. The first one we bought was the Middeke building. John Dotson helped us do the financing. We brought in Marva Eller to help us with the historic tax credits, and Jeff Johnson to be the general contractor to build 45 loft apartments using CDBG funds, again with Matt Gabrielson leading the way. These projects are incredibly difficult to do, as I have now found out, because most of them have sat vacant for over 50 plus years. If you ever want to know all of the mistakes that are possible, I am your guy. I am an expert in how not to do these projects. One of the things we did, though, is we condoed the building by floor, and that enabled us a lot more flexibility with our exit plan and our financing. Leslie Batchelor and Okira, again, kind of helped us figure out some of the challenges that we were facing. So I get a call from Tom Ward last summer, and Tom Ward is getting ready to create a new energy company called Tapstone. Tom wanted me to help him find office space downtown. As most of you in this room know, downtown office space is incredibly difficult to come by, especially when you're looking for how many square feet we were looking for. We made numerous offers to both buy and or lease space and never really found a good fit. About 2 weeks from construction commencing on my housing plans, Tom approached me about Tapstone taking all of the Middeke building. Tom loved the building's proximity to the CBD, yet while remaining in Bricktown, having all of the amenities that Bricktown would provide to his employees, and more importantly, he was thinking about his foreign investors when they were coming in and staying at the hotels and seeing all of the things that Bricktown could provide. Chris Dunning, again, came through big time for us in our financing, this time through Prosperity Bank. Really appreciate them and all that they've done for us on the transaction. Our architect will be Rogers & Associates, contractor will be Lingo. So one of the things that I love about this city is how adamant city leadership is to make this a great place to live. Brent Bryant, Kathy O'Connor, Wiley Williams, Matt Gabrielson, Leslie Batchelor, these people wake up every single day and are working to make this a better place. And they do a really good job of financially motivating developers to take on the hard projects that matter, but putting strings attached to those funds to protect the taxpayer. That's one thing I really wanted to point out, and it's because of them that I believe that the future of downtown Oklahoma City is very bright, with many more opportunities for all of us to pursue. I'm obviously out of time, but the Spaghetti Warehouse and the park are the next frontier. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate the kind words. It truly does take a village of folks working on these projects to get them done, and I'm grateful to be part of them. Our final 2020 Lightning Round presenter is a consultant for independent retail businesses. From advising local shops and districts to creating unique uses for space, Barta Bailey is helping create a vibrant urban community. Please welcome the owner of Barta Bailey, Allison Bailey.
Hi, I'm Allison Bailey. Independent local retail is my thing. When I started my business several years ago, I was helping shops with their advertising budget, picking magazine ads, and basic marketing skills. But in the very recent past, I've seen a shift in the way that shops want to market and position themselves. I'm helping clients with pop-up shops and strategic new walkable urban locations. There's a reason for that. 3 themes are emerging in new creative retail concepts: efficiency, density, and experiences. Both the customers and the shop owners want this for their spaces. Temporary use of vacant space is an ever-present trend in this market. These pop-up shops and temporary uses of vacant space aren't just in New York City and San Francisco, they're happening here in Oklahoma City. Pop-up shops are the golden child of the temporary use of vacant space. It activates a space either temporarily or for a longer permanent use. It brings a light on a space that has been overlooked. We took this trend and replicated it here in Oklahoma City for what we called the holiday pop-up shops. Last year was our second year running, and we were in Midtown. We rotated 30 local shops through 6 geodesic domes for 4 weeks. We get calls weekly on how we were able to gain traction in a marketplace for a concept like this. Our domes have been pinned to pin boards all around the country. This provided an immediate economic impact in the form of an additional point of sale during the busiest shopping season of the year. It also provided an opportunity for startup retailers to test a concept. That meant that there could be a longer-term, more permanent economic impact as well. By the end of this year, we would love to boast that we will have 4 retailers from the holiday shops with permanent leases. 3 of them will be within walking distance of our location in Midtown. This is Sarah Kate Studio. She'll be at 1100 North Broadway, 10th and Broadway, hopefully later this year. Better Block, Oklahoma City is another example of temporary use that has turned into a permanent change. We have reached the 2-year mark on the Better Block project at the corner of Hudson and 7th Street. If you're one of the 20,000 people that have visited H&H this spring season, you'll notice that the block is starting to fill up with permanent businesses. These permanent businesses are developing out of temporary space, and technology is following suit. Punch Space and Storefront are online concepts that match pop-up shops with vacant spaces. Storefront recently received $3.7 million from Spark Capital, so people are putting their money where the customers are. Farmers markets are taking a concept of not using an intentionally vacant space, but using a vacant lot to create an experience. They're expanding nationwide and not just in buildings meant for them, in grassy lots and parking lots too. Urban Agrarian does a great job of bringing farmers markets to the Oklahoma City market. Food truck parks continue with this format, although more intentionally. They're another use of vacant space, but many of these are a conscious use of this space until a permanent development can be determined. This South Conquest food truck park in Austin is now a hotel development. We're seeing a local version of this called the Blue Garden. It's stemmed off of the passion that H&H has developed for food trucks. It will be located at 10th and Harvey. They recently passed design review and hopefully will be open this September. Our holiday shops will be joining them at the corner of 10th and Hudson to create an entire block of experience. Retailers are taking a hint from food trucks about flexibility. These tactical retail spaces can pop up in public space or privately owned plazas. They create density and provide a creative, low-cost startup for entrepreneurs. When the audience moves, the business can move with it. When they're ready to take the wheels off, kiosks also provide density in available spaces. This isn't a traditional kiosk that you see in a mall. This is an innovative, hip version of the concept, and imagine walking out of your office building into the plaza and buying a book or makeup or outdoor gear in the winter. Alleyway spaces are maximizing space that already exists. They're adding an additional storefront to a building and creating excitement all the way around the building. We're happy to boast a new alleyway business here in Oklahoma City. Peloton, located behind Schlegel Bicycles, has been very successful with an excellent patio. We also have an upcoming alleyway business near 10th and Hudson from the mines behind the Ludovine restaurant. This will be in the back of the Archer Printing Building, and I'm very excited to see what kind of place is created from that. These trends have set a higher bar for districts and property owners to curate an experience in their spaces. We've worked with developers like our previous presenter, David, to make sure that tenants in new space meet all of the needs. Does it fit with the existing environment? Is it a useful, efficient space for customers? How does it meld with the other businesses like Empire Slice in the district? National retailers are taking note too. It isn't just indie shops and temporary installations that are evolving in the new landscape. Urban format national retailers are making better use of space and catering to this efficient shopper. It doesn't just apply to temporary installations. This is about creating a density and an experience, and we're seeing national retailers sharing space together. They're doing this by becoming smaller and more indie-like and creating an experience that customers want to come shop to. I expect to see more and more of these trends in Oklahoma City over the next few years. Again, I'm Allison Bailey. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram as Shopcrawler and online at bartabailey.com.
Thank you, Allison. I think hearing those four young entrepreneurs speak this morning, my own sense that our best days are yet to come is confirmed. So thank all of you for your quick presentations there. For our first headline speaker, following Larry Beasley today, our speaker is the co-author of The Metropolitan Revolution. This book, if you haven't read it, seems to me, as I told Jennifer, the co-author, last night, to be written for Oklahoma City, because it chronicles how in today's economy, with today's politics, metropolitan areas and city governments are the economic engines of this country. She explains the critical role of metropolitan areas and what they need to do in the future to be truly successful. So today she'll share with us a little bit about how cities and metros like ours can build the foundation of the new economy. And she'll emphasize that a key part of that is adequately supporting their metropolitan economic engines. So please join me in welcoming Brookings Fellow from the Metropolitan Policy Program, Jennifer Bradley.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to learn about Oklahoma City and all of the great things that are taking place here. My talk is going to step back a little bit and put the amazing projects that we've been hearing about in a larger context of economic and political trends that my colleagues at the Brookings Institution and I see as supporting and, in fact, even advancing some of the physical development projects that y'all are doing so well. You're doing so many things right here in Oklahoma City, but as you know, when it comes to building a livable, sustainable, and economically viable place, there's no such thing as finished. So I want to talk a little bit about some national and global trends. And the first is that we're facing a pivotal decade in the United States. We need more than 7 million jobs to recover the jobs that we lost during the 2008 economic downturn and keep pace with general population growth and labor market dynamics. But we also need better jobs to grow wages and incomes for lower and middle class workers and reverse the troubling and decades-long rise in inequality. Inequality, new research is telling us, is not just a social problem, it's also an economic drag. You need demand at all levels, and if people aren't earning enough, they're not spending and they're not stimulating the economy. Between 2000 and 2011, the number of poor and near poor people in the United States increased from 81 million to about 107 million. That's over a third of the total population of this country. And again, this is not just a social problem, this is a drag on demand, and it's part of what's keeping the economic recovery from taking stronger root across the country. Now, in the wake of the Great Recession, it's become clear that the United States, like many nations, needs a new growth model. We've come to the limits of an economy that's built on mindless consumption and endless debt. Instead, we need an economy that focuses more on production and exports, on research and development, and on opportunity for people at all points along the income and education continuum. Now, even before last year's government shutdown and flirtation with catastrophic default on the US debt, it's been clear that America's cities and metropolitan areas really are on their own to develop and deliver this next economy that we need. This predicament is not just about partisanship, it's about math. In the coming years, mandatory spending, mainly on federal entitlement programs, will take up an ever larger share of the federal budget, crowding out so-called discretionary spending, which is basically spending on everything else except payments on our national debt. So what the Metropolitan Revolution means is that in the face of federal dysfunction, metropolitan leaders are not waiting for Washington. Instead, they're stepping up and doing the hard work to grow more jobs and make their communities more prosperous. Now, why metros? Why do we focus on metros as opposed to states or another unit? Well, the nation's 100 largest metropolitan areas are already the engines of our economies and the centers of trade and investment. They sit on just about an eighth of our land area, but they're home to 2/3 of our population, and they're responsible for about 75% of our GDP. And on every indicator that really matters for this kind of research, development, and export-driven economy that we're trying to create, metropolitan areas punch way above their weight. They account for between 75 and 90% of the national share. So it's not surprising that when it comes to reorienting our economy, metropolitan areas are where we start. I was gratified to hear that Oklahoma City has been singled out for entrepreneurship, because it's entrepreneurship and innovation that really drive metropolitan power, as this animation that I'm about to show you from the iPad app that we did to go along with the book shows, if it works. Let's see. And we have no volume.
Garage and single-handedly creates a whole new economy. But our national economy and the metropolitan economies that drive it are more than the simple sum of individuals and firms. Entrepreneurs rely on metropolitan ecosystems. Inventors build on ideas generated by universities and public and private research centers. Their inventions are built by skilled workers, and their goods and services are transported by planes, trains, and automobiles. Garages may work for rock bands, but metros power our economy and determine our prosperity.
The beginning of the video, which you didn't hear, talked about we have this image of entrepreneurs sitting by themselves, in a garage thinking up ideas. But I think what the presenters so far have shown is what the video speaks to, which is you need a community supporting these ideas. You need people who can share resources and play ideas off of each other. And if you have a strong entrepreneurial energy, you have a lot of people coming together to work and bring all these elements into play. So our book tells the story of 7 metros where networks of actors are creating these ecosystems where people can flourish and the economy can grow. Denver is growing through regional collaboration that gets results, while Los Angeles is investing in state-of-the-art transit. Cleveland and Northeast Ohio are making manufacturing a priority again. New York City is becoming a tech hub. Houston is helping immigrants become entrepreneurs. Portland is linking small businesses with new markets in global cities. And Detroit is reinventing its downtown and midtown as an innovation district. I want to go a little deeper on 4 of these examples of how metropolitan leaders are really seizing the opportunity that this moment presents. The first story comes from New York. Now, as you know, New York was the epicenter of the global financial meltdown. City leaders had long recognized that they needed to diversify their economy and be somewhat less dependent on finance, but the Great Recession made this an absolutely urgent necessity. So city leaders started to ask a simple question: what can we do in New York to increase economic activity? And they didn't just ask people in the city government, and they didn't just ask people in the economic development community. They went out and spoke to 300 business leaders and several dozen community groups and university leaders. And what they heard over and over again was that New York did not have enough advanced technology and engineering talent. So they decided that the best way to create the talent that was needed, not only to invent entirely new industries in the city, but also to support the many industries in New York that were traditional industries like finance and media and fashion and medicine, but saw that they would also need an advanced technology component if they were to grow and stay competitive. The only way to create the pipeline of engineers was to attract a world-class graduate science and engineering campus. In December 2010, the city and the New York Economic Development Corporation launched an international competition to bring a new science and engineering graduate school to the city. Between December 2011 and April 2012, the city announced 3 applied sciences campuses, and they've just announced a 4th. The city has leveraged about $130 million in public funding, mainly for infrastructure improvements on the site, to attract as much as $2 billion in private investment. All told, the graduate applied sciences campuses are expected to generate about $33 billion in economic impact, about 48,000 jobs, and nearly 1,000 new companies over the next 30 years. This is a long-term play, but it's already really showing benefits for the city. The applied sciences graduate schools will help New York strengthen its existing clusters, as I was saying, in media and healthcare, and seed new ones in urban transportation, energy-efficient buildings, and city design. We interviewed leaders in New York City who were responsible for the Applied Sciences Initiative, and in this video clip, you'll hear a little bit about how they decided to embark on the Applied Sciences Initiative.
As you look at the economy in New York, we have a lot of strengths, but it's clear everywhere in industry that technology is disrupting business models. And so while applied science and engineering can help startup companies, it's also required for the key industries that are already here.
These great institutions that have made a commitment to come to New York, not in an ivory tower tradition, but to partner with industry, to partner with the corporate community, to really design the next generation of whole industries.
It really is a momentum that has fed upon itself. You've seen the reality on the ground change, and as the reality on the ground has changed, I think the ambition of the various universities in turn has continued to ratchet up. And this is a virtuous cycle that we hope continues for many, many years into the future.
The important point to take away from the New York story is not that every city needs a graduate engineering and sciences campus, but that city leaders need to work through networks to learn more about what the economic development needs are in their community. You know, nobody thought that Mayor Bloomberg had a small ego or that he was not a confident man, but even he knew that he didn't know everything about what it would take to revitalize New York's business community after the recession. My next story is about a place that also decided to do things a little differently than it had in the past when it was pursuing growth. It decided to grow collaboratively as a metropolitan area and transcend the traditional zero-sum approach to economic growth. The Denver metropolitan area throughout the 1960s and 1970s suffered greatly from tensions around land, tax revenue, and race. The result was a culture of mistrust and competition between the city and its neighbors, a situation that some likened to outright war. But then in the 1980s, a sharp downturn in the energy market, which I'm sure some of y'all remember yourselves, caused business leaders, residents, and others to realize that the economy didn't respect municipal boundaries. If Denver was hurting, Littleton, Aurora, Broomfield, and Boulder were also going to suffer. Now, as a response to its own economic difficulties, the state of Colorado had cut funding for the museums and cultural institutions that meant so much to the people of the Denver region. The museum and cultural institutions leaders realized that most of their visitors in a year were not just from the city of Denver. They were, again, from the surrounding metropolitan area. So they launched a collaborative effort that created a cross-municipality tax district to raise revenue for Denver's Art Museum, Natural History Museum, and Zoo, among others, because of the understanding that these assets, while they were based in the city of Denver, actually benefited the entire region. The tax passed in 1988 and has been renewed several times, even as the state of Colorado has been the hotbed of taxpayer Bill of Rights and other low or no tax movements. The success around cultural institutions led to other successes, and that brings me to the 2 key networks that are operating in Denver that I'm going to highlight. The first is the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. Leaders in Greater Denver were among the first to understand that in the global economy, the municipalities in the Denver area are not competing against each other. In fact, they're competing with Oklahoma City. They're competing with Dallas. They're competing with Bangalore. They're competing with Sydney. They're competing on the world scale. The Greater Denver Corporation, which became the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, was created with the notion that if local entities would unite to bring a company to the metropolitan area, their own communities and their own residents would benefit no matter what the street address of the new company was, because of the effect of supply chains and labor markets. Prior to this effort, a local leader told us that there were over 40 economic development agencies in the region that were all competing against each other for the same leads. Today, the Metro Denver region is 10 times more successful at economic development than it was when it was a kind of dog-eat-dog, every municipality for itself approach. Now, seeing the success of economic development collaboration, mayors in the region started to wonder whether they could work together as well on a more regional basis. In 1993, a handful of mayors formed the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, which is a collaborative group that now counts about 40 local leaders as members. One of the caucus's main concerns was transportation, because, as you know, it's an inherently metropolitan issue. Local leaders feared that Denver's rapid growth would end up choking the region and become an impediment to more growth and profitability. So they needed a new way to accommodate all of the new people that would be coming to their region looking for opportunity. In 2004, regional voters approved a small sales tax increase to fund the build-out of a new transportation network, which is projected to cost about $4 billion and stretch for 122 miles. It's the largest urban transportation project underway in the United States. Denver leaders see this as key not only to just the business of getting around day to day, but also to establishing themselves on the world stage as a global city. The collaboration that it takes to pull off something like the biggest transit expansion in America is never perfect, and it's rarely painless. But the proof that collaboration works is that people in the Denver region have chosen to pursue this path for more than 30 years. In the next video, you'll hear from a couple of people who are some of the staunchest supporters for this kind of working together attitude.
The fact that we operate by consensus has meant that sometimes there have been some tough issues that we had to let go. It's more important to these mayors to be in collaboration, to be working together with each other than it is to be able to attack everything that comes down the road.
It's like a sibling relationship. There are some times when you have tremendous highs and things are running great, and there are other times where you're frustrated and you don't seem to understand where the challenges exist or why they exist at all. But if you care enough and if it's valuable enough to you, you will work on that relationship and do everything you can to always be prepared to get over those hurdles when they present themselves. There are many cities around the world thinking about how they can compete Denver, out-compete Los Angeles, out-compete New York. As a region, if we work together, we can compete against everyone else around the world, and we can do it well. We have a greater chance to be globally connected and globally competitive.
My third story is about how metros are connecting not just internally in the same state or region, but across the globe. Portland, Oregon is known as a path-breaking green region. But what most people don't know about weird and crunchy Portland is that it's also an export powerhouse. It doubled its total export value between 2003 and 2010, and it's among the most export-intensive metropolitan areas in the country. So when the Great Recession hit, Portland's leaders understood that if they were going to grow, they were going to have to redouble their efforts to sell goods and services to consumers around the world. Now, what Portland has to sell the rest of the world is, somewhat ironically, its local lifestyle. As cities and metros around the world fill with greater shares of the world's population, metro building has created immense market opportunities. As metros grow, they need infrastructure of all kinds: energy, transportation, telecommunications, and housing. Portland's leaders launched a We Build Green Cities effort to promote the region's clean tech companies and products as solutions for global clean economy challenges. Local firms in Portland are now exporting their homegrown green tech to booming cities in developing countries such as China, Qatar, and Brazil. In the next video, you'll hear from some of the people who oversaw Portland's export charge and how they were able to take something that seemed very local and figure out how to find a world market for it.
Sustainability is, as an emerging industry, the sustainable technology and sustainable services industries is a little abstract for some people, and we saw that as a competitive advantage.
We know how to build cities. We have companies that do the architectural services, the clean technology, the green roofs, all the things that go into making a green city. And don't you want your city to be a little bit like this as well?
What it is that Portland has to offer, and as most of the rest of the world continues to urbanize at a drastically faster pace, we think we have a package of services and goods that are going to be incredibly valuable to those economies all around the world.
Now, before I embark on my last story, I want to pause for a minute and go back to the opening animation, which made the point that the economic power of metropolitan areas and the foundation of the metropolitan revolution turns on innovation. And innovation and density are a perfect match for each other. This brings me to one of the most exciting developments that my colleagues and I have seen across the country in the last few years, and that's innovation districts. Now, a month after my book, The Metropolitan Revolution, came out, the city of Detroit declared bankruptcy. And so we would go and talk about our book, and somebody inevitably would raise their hand and say, Detroit just went bankrupt. Doesn't this totally undermine your book and blow it out of the water? Well, we were never going to say, yep, you're right, we're packing it in. But in fact, we had featured Detroit in our book because of the Innovation District. And Detroit makes a powerful point that cities in metropolitan areas can be strong, not necessarily because of strong local governments. Not every place is lucky enough to have the strong local leadership and local elected leadership that y'all have here in Oklahoma City. What makes cities in metropolitan areas strong is a network of leaders from the philanthropic, public, corporate, and civic sectors. Now, when most people look at Detroit, they see sort of what's not there. They see the vacant land, they see abandoned buildings, they see a place that's really empty. But if you look at the downtown and midtown neighborhoods in Detroit, it's got about 3% of the city's land mass, but it's 11% of the business establishments and 37% of the jobs in a relatively dense area. An entrepreneur who grew up in one of Detroit's suburbs has invested about $1 billion in downtown office buildings, and approximately 10,000 new jobs have come to the downtown in the last 2 years. Now, downtown and midtown Detroit concentrate a wealth of innovation institutions, including hospitals, businesses, higher education and design centers, and business incubators. A new rail line will soon serve as kind of the circulatory system for the emerging innovation district here. It's the density of these innovative institutions and companies that we think will create the kind of economic spark that will spread to the rest of Detroit and could spur, over the long term, a revival in that great city. And again, this next video from our iPad app explains why leaders in Detroit tried so hard to create that density and why it was so important, particularly in a place like Detroit where a lot of places were emptied out.
The density that we were trying to create was to put more feet on the street, as I put it, and not just between 9 to 5, but around the clock, 24/7, to create an exciting urban environment.
How do you best do that? You do it by creating a built environment that really is dense and that sort of forces folks to come together every day, whether it's walking across the campus or whether it's stopping into your local bakery.
You're at Starbucks and you had the opportunity to bounce into somebody who's working on something related, or you're out in the evening and you're having a drink and you're talking to somebody. It's that intersection of ideas and energy that really makes a city powerful. And we needed that here in our region, and we need to do it in a confined area so that it's not sort of lost through diffusion.
Now, if even Detroit can be part of the metropolitan revolution, there's no place in the country that should feel left out of this opportunity. The places that we feature in our book are by no means the whole story. We see the metropolitan revolution taking root in communities across the country. So what does it take for any place to start its own revolution? First and most important, metros have to create networks of people who take ownership and responsibility for social and economic progress. I think Oklahoma City has a great start on that because I think all of you in this room believe that you are building the next great Oklahoma City. The federal government, as you know, works in silos, and that's what makes it so frustrating to deal with. But metropolitan areas are networks of leaders who come together. Now, in some places, it's the mayor or even a governor who can convene the metropolitan network. But if they don't, others step in, like CEOs and business leaders, or leaders of universities or civic groups and philanthropies. The point is that a metropolitan network requires people acting in all of these sectors. Once you have a network in place, a metropolitan area needs to declare a distinctive vision that should be rooted in sound economic thinking and local data and evidence. When I go around the country, I hear a lot of places say, we want to be the next fill in the blank, right? We want to be the next Silicon Valley. We want to be the next Austin. Don't do that. You can't be the next Silicon Valley. You can't be the next Austin. You can be a world-class and absolutely amazing Oklahoma City. So you need to understand what your particular offer is. What's going to differentiate you and cause somebody to say, I really need to stay in, or I need to come to Oklahoma City so I can realize my dream. You've got amazing basic ingredients, and use those to continue to build something that is special and unique and unlike any other place. Once you have a vision that's truly distinctive and truly represents what you're best at, then use that vision to discover and deliver the intervention that will alter how you're perceived, both internally but also on the world stage. This is done, again, not by copying, but by building on your own strengths. New York's game changer was attracting world-class universities. Portland's was exporting their green and sustainable brand. Detroit's is a renaissance based on their urban cores. What's yours? I can't answer that. That answer's got to come from the people in the room today. I'll close with one final animation, which underscores the point that it really is up to metropolitan areas to lead not just themselves, but our nation as a whole in the coming decades.
From an early age, we are taught how our nation is supposed to work. The president, vice president, and members of Congress sit at the top. Governors and legislators run their states. The rest of us take our cues from them. While states and the federal government may be part of the Constitution, our population and economic power is actually concentrated in our metropolitan areas. It's time to rethink power in America. In this century, metros will lead, and states and the federal government will follow. In cities and metros, public, private, and civic leaders are helping workers get the skills they need, investing in infrastructure and growing jobs through expanded trade and investment, the hard work necessary to renew our economy.
Thanks very much, and I look forward to continuing this conversation during the question and answer period later today.
So the morning has already been full of great information, and we still have several great presentations to go. Next, we have two 15-minute presentations that each focus on a unique project to Oklahoma City that's really going to pay dividends in terms of economic, social, and community benefits. They're two very different projects, but I think they are elements that make our city truly great. First, we're going to hear about one of the most exciting projects to come our way in a long time. As a logical extension of Oklahoma City's energy economy, we are proud to have attracted the GE Global Research Center. Here to talk a little bit about the great things that are going to happen there is Mike Ming, its executive director. Mike?
So thanks, Leslie, and good morning, and thank you, Mayor, for everything you've done. So, wow, this is really cool. You know, Mayor, when we talked last December, I didn't realize all these developments that I can now tell our folks, you know where they can live. But it's so neat. So you all have gotten a pretty heavy dose this morning of right brain. So I guess, Leslie, I know I'm the designated left brain here as the engineer. So I'm gonna talk about the exciting project that we have. And last April, my new boss, Mark Little, who's GE's Chief Technology Officer, and Jeff Immelt came to Oklahoma with Governor Fallin to announce the decision to expand our global research network to Oklahoma City. And this is a unique component of that. It's the first global research center that's dedicated to one industry. And as GE went through that evaluation, they looked at 5 factors, and Oklahoma City were the clear winner. And those were proximity to customers, so those are the people that are going to fill the exciting developments that you've talked about, with all of our independents who have really led the transformation in unconventional resources. Established legacy universities that do what we do: engineering, geoscience, business, economics. So centrally located here between OU, OSU, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City University really provides that partnership that we're looking for. Talent recruitment and skilled workforce, just incredible here. Oklahoma City just ranks so high now in this around energy. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, others have just recognized what's gone on here. Fourth was the transportation network. So I-35, I-40, I-44 junction, rail, air, allows people to get here, but not have to get here and be congested. So that was a big deal. And maybe most important, and this really impressed the leadership at the company at the highest levels, was the business-friendly environment. So that's at the state level, and that's at the local level. And I was talking to Roy earlier, but it's just been amazing every time we've reached out to anyone. Leslie, you and Kathy, for especially an example. Every time we've reached out, it's just everybody does backflips, and it's a great thing. So I commend you for that. But since the 7 months that followed the announcement last April, we worked to identify a site. In December, Mark Little and I joined the mayor and a lot of other officials, at the city chamber with Roy, and announced our site at 10th and Walnut. So it's a great site for what we need. It's perfect. So we have the School of Science and Mathematics on the north side. That's our lifeline of the future. We have the former Presbyterian Health Foundation Research Park, now OU, on the south side. We have the OU Medical Complex to the east. But that area, which has mostly been a health and medical research park, we hope to expand that whole concept and really become a growth for development around energy, add that. And at full scale, we hope that our economic impact is, $13 million a year. Our chairman, Jeff Immelt, it's a name he's widely recognized around the globe, but he says, every job's a good job, but if you really want the multiples, the research center is the one that sort of becomes the nucleus that grows the satellites around it. So it's a really exciting thing. The facility is going to be over 100,000 square feet. And what it brings to Oklahoma City, just adds to Bricktown, the Devon Tower, the Chesapeake Boathouse, the arena, the Oklahoma River. We're really excited for the Technology Center to be a part of that growth. And I'll throw out a few shout outs here. It's locally designed, locally built. So Bud Miles and his team have done the architectural work on it. You can see the rendering on the slide. And then Flintco's going to do the construction. And Flintco, they built the Devon Tower, among other things. But it's been a great team to work with. We went through a really rigorous competitive process to do that. And Bud and his team at Miles and Associates really brought the kind of thinking that makes this a marquee facility. And we think it'll be great to add to the skyline. Every view that we have As we say when we show it to our folks at the higher level, when you look out of that window southwest, you not only see the development you're talking about, but for us, we see buildings full of customers. And we want to be close to them. We want to interact with them. We want to collaborate with them. If you've been by the site lately, you've seen there's work going on. We're relocating utilities now, working with Kathy and the team to get the streets and everything designed. It's an exciting building. It's basically a collaboration hub with an office all built around a lab. So we'll actually have test holes in the ground, deep but not that deep, like 60 feet to 400 feet deep, where we can do our stuff. Basically the oil and gas industry, everything's a hole in the ground, and so that's what we do. But we are excited to get that ceremony, and our target completion date is late third quarter of 2015. So in the meantime, we're downtown in the City Place Tower. We have targets to hire 130 people, and these are really high quality jobs. We'll fill that facility in our temporary space downtown by the time that we're able to move in next year, and we're rapidly growing the team. So when we had the event in December, we were 3 employees. Actually, last summer we were 1 employee, and that was me. But as of today, we've hired 25. And we have that many job postings that are out there. On top of that, it's exciting who we've already hired, and these are high-paying jobs. Many of them are well in excess of $100,000 per year. Very highly technical, professional positions. And as we look at what we've already hired and sitting in City Place today, of course we have folks from Oklahoma, Arizona, Michigan, New York, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Texas, and Wyoming. So these are people that are moving here, have already moved here. That's really exciting. Even more exciting, and people said, I'm not sure everybody understands how big of a deal this is. And I do, because I've spent most of my life here in Oklahoma City. I grew up here. But the network of these global research labs is impressive. So the headquarters is in Niskayuna, New York. That's kind of Albany, Schenectady, Niskayuna are right there together. But the other sites are in Silicon Valley, Bangalore, India. I heard that mentioned this morning. Shanghai, China, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and Munich, Germany. So we are really in a stratosphere of company there with those partners. The center is really about growing the oil and gas industry. So a lot of people say, well, I didn't know GE was in the oil and gas business. The oil and gas business just within GE is almost $20 billion a year business out of GE's $150 billion of revenue. The oil and gas business at GE has 45,000 employees around the world, just the one business. So we're talking scale here that really allows us to bring what we call adjacent technologies in and do it right here. We've made significant investments in the business over the last 20 years, over $14 billion invested. One of the companies you may or may not know that GE acquired was the Wood Group. It's down on South Sooner Road. They have about 600 employees down there. Incredible technology being applied that's not widely known, but it's really exciting. But utilizing the broad industrial enterprise of the company to take technology that makes jet engines reliable to fly a 2-engined aircraft overseas, or healthcare imaging, any of these things is the kind of things that we'll do here. And driving that technology, really what we say is produce, transport, and use oil and gas, but importantly, better, smarter, cleaner, safer, faster, and more efficient. That's really what we're going to drive here in Oklahoma City. We will have very much of a focus on unconventional resources. We'll work on production systems, so that would be how we get this oil and gas out of the ground, use big data, optimization, things like that, how we drill and complete wells to reduce the environmental footprint and reduce environmental impact. Water, we all know that's a critical thing right now in a drought. Reduce, reuse, recycle, relocate, novel uses where we can be much more efficient. Carbon dioxide, you read about it as a greenhouse gas. In the oil and gas industry, we look at it as a beneficial fluid that does amazing things for our operations. And then energy systems, so CNG vehicles, LNG trains, power plants, lots of opportunities. Oil and gas is going to be a big part of our energy mix for years to come. But I really want to emphasize the support that we've received from the city, from the state, from the community. It's just been tremendous. Governor Fallon, Mayor Cornett, Councilman Pettis, we were talking earlier this morning, just like in his Ward 7, the things that are going on. If you were here, and most of you were 20 years ago, and you look at those areas, it's so neat what's happening today. Okur, I can't say enough good things about working with you and all the business leaders. So we're really proud to be here. And to bring the growth of a global industry here. I know we're going to have global visitors. They're going to come from all countries all over the world, and I know that you all will welcome them with open arms and make them feel welcome. So thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for the invitation here, and we look forward to our new home here in Oklahoma City. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I think it's worth noting the intersection between these big global projects and the personal level of the built environment for our city. I would just pass along the fact that Mike and his wife are downtown residents and are purchasing a home right downtown. So projects like that help in so many ways. So turning to a very different kind of beneficial project, and we're going to talk a little bit about the new King's Crossing, a new development that will transform the northeast side of Oklahoma City at Northeast 23rd and MLK, spreading the renaissance of downtown through other areas of our city. I'm proud to introduce Susan Binkowski, and I think you'll share her passion for her project. Susan.
Well, to say I'm ecstatic to be here would be an understatement. But I'm exuberant mostly because I met last night with some of the other speakers, and we had a chance to break bread together and to hear each other's vision and stories. And what it just totally confirmed for me is that there is something truly amazing happening in our city. And these things that are coming are no accident. They, in fact, have been planted in the hearts of different leaders. And we sometimes, when we get isolated, we think that, oh, that was just my idea. But in fact, I would just point it upward to our Heavenly Father, who has big plans for this city, and it is clearly coming to pass. I do want to offer some perspective, though, and just step back. And each one of you has a passion, and each one of you have come with very specific ideas of developments and projects that want to be change agents for our community. And the thread that is running through that is the connection, the community. That's truly what is changing our city from the very roots. I can only share my story. You spoke about being a left brain. I'm not sure which brain I'm in. I think I throw across both sides. But I want to give you just a little bit of history. My company is Esperanza Real Estate. Now, Esperanza means hope. And when I started that real estate company, I needed a lot of it. And I married my husband 10 years ago, and he has been in the grocery business for 25 years. Owns the Buy for Less, opened the first one in 1988. And we've had a year like no other this year, and a trajectory change that happened about 3 years ago. When we stood back and we looked at a map of where all of our different stores are, we have 14 stores in the metro. They range from 4 purely Hispanic stores, our Supermercado. We have the Buy for Less stores in different neighborhoods, and also Uptown Grocery Company in Edmond. and each one of their markets are very diverse and very different. And what we found, and Hank and I have both gone through the Salt and Light leadership training, but what we found as we looked at that map, a new revelation that not only were we called to a project, but we were called to this city. You are called to this city for a purpose. There's a reason that you all are in leadership in this city. And when we looked at that map and the spatial relationship, it was sort of okay, so that's what we have been given as a platform. So our platform is grocery, and the beauty of that is that every intimate thing that we've ever done happens around food. And that when the food shows up, community happens. And so that's where this conversation at 23rd and Martin Luther King started. My husband purchased the business 3 years ago. We didn't own the building at the time, but said he would take over an existing grocery business. And our plans eventually were to just buy the property behind it, and we'd build a new store and we'd tear down the old one. And I being the real estate girl, I just started looking for property and called the guy that owned it right behind us, and it turned out that he had 11 acres. And I went, okay, well, what can we do with 11 acres? Well, I would love to tell you that I'm smart enough and connected enough to have accomplished all of this on my own. I'm not. I immediately called every business person that was involved on the Northeast side, Mary Myrick with Public Strategies, Robin Jones with SALT, Sandino Thompson, John Pettis, Scott McLean. And I said, can we just go meet with the city and like talk about this? So truly, I knocked on Kathy's door, Kathy O'Connor and her group, and she kind of agreed to humor me. But we like marched in with this like army of people and sat around, and she put the property up on the screen. Well, the property right there is that really dark spot in the middle. That's about 20 acres in total. And we put that up on the screen, and Ian Colgan goes, okay, where's your site plan? I go, I don't have a site plan. I'm like, we want to do grocery, but what else does this community need? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, help me design, bring, communicate what this city needs, because I promise you what I would pick is not necessarily what this community was calling for. So that conversation launched to Ian saying, at the time, again, I had the 11 acres. He said, you know what? Let's just pretend like we have it all. Let's pretend like we have all of those parcels. So going back to Blair Humphreys, which he's been mentioned several times, I called Blair and I said, you know what? Ian says I have to have a site plan. Can you make me one in like 2 weeks? And this was December, the week before Christmas. And he says, I'm busy. And so he said, however, let me connect you to Jim Hassenbeck with Studio Architecture. So I called Jim and I said, look, Jim, I have this property, but I want to see what I can put on it, and I don't really know how to put it together, and I don't really want to spend that much money, so can you do it in 2 weeks? And he said, sure. So that same hodgepodge of Northeast leadership, civic leadership, met at Studio Architecture, and we sat around the room and we dreamed. And we started to put boxes, and we started to call out what my friend Ilinda Jackson, who has lived on the Northeast side her whole life, who has driven me around the Northeast side with Kim Bandy and her husband, and told me the story of what was. She showed me where she grew up, and that this used to be a happening part of town. In fact, everybody used to want to live here. And she showed me what happened when the tumbleweeds started to blow through, and what happened to the esteem of her community and her esteem as she's trying to raise people up. So her vision, I stole her vision, and we translated that, the group of us, to what you will see now. And I'm just going to walk through this so you can see highlighted in yellow the total area that we have now accumulated and put together. And this is, we're just so excited, because what happened is, John Pettis, where are you? Okay, it's my brother Noopsy. Okay, so John Pettis, and my husband calls him my BFF. I said, John, okay, this is what I want to do. And he drug this blonde girl to every meeting and knocked on every door and said, she's going to put the grocery store in. You know, do you want to go? Do you want to go? Do you want to come? Do you want to be here? And he really has been a champion for his ward. There hasn't been a new development there in over 60 years. So what we see now, and I'll start to kind of flip through the slides, the big red box is what we just announced yesterday. Although we have a Buy for Less store there now, which is about 18,000 square feet, we are going to put an Uptown grocery company there. And we're so excited to not only bring the Buy for Less pricing that we've always had, but also the services, the community, the points of interruption, and the space that an Uptown market would afford this community. The box in blue, which I think is labeled B, is a school. It's a 4-story school that will not only has partnered with us, but they're going to be teaching things like culinary, floral design, hospitality, a meat cutting school, everything that would be able to furnish automatic jobs for these people that are graduating. Across the way, the other blue building is totally devoted to job creation. We have tenants that have already signed their LOIs, and that building is dedicated to transforming people, taking them from not being employed to being employed. The two yellow buildings that you see side by side there with the kind of the black line across them, those are a live-work opportunity. We set those aside specifically for local retailers, local entrepreneurs that maybe had an idea but didn't know what to do, didn't have the space to do it in. We're going to be very sensitive in what we charge them as far as rental rates. And above it will be housing so that they can literally have a live-work situation. A brand new opportunity for Black entrepreneurs and other people that have invested their lives in that community, just needed a place to be. To the left of that, the blue building is, it was only going to be 14,000 square feet, and now our medical provider has said, you know what, we want all 18,000 square feet. And so we're going to have 5 docs and lots of providers and lots of care. Do you know that there's only one primary practice doctor in all of Northeast Oklahoma City? One. How many of you in our worlds would tolerate that? And yet this community has had that for so long. What you see in the pink is at the back are 65 brownstones that will be every bit as cute and stylish as you have going on the hill. And they are set up much like the New York style and Toronto and Vancouver style of walkability. And so everything is built out of transparency. You see the park is sort of central to that, the water aspect. And there'll be a clubhouse, not only for use for the residents, but also for the community. We have a lot of green space in between the two blue buildings for outdoor events and music for people to interact and connect. And this is sort of that bird's eye view, so that you can start to feel what the skin is going to look like on the buildings. I cannot say enough to the help that I have received on this project, because like I said, I assure you, I'm not talented or smart enough or connected enough to have accomplished this. Literally, we're in May, and this started literally pen and paper in December. Nothing happens like that. You all in the development world know nothing happens like that without divine intervention. But this is the sort of the aspect from the north side looking forward of the brownstones that'll have backyards. Some of them will have they have garages on the front and some on the back. And this is the Uptown grocery store that we're so excited about. And so this flavor of the development is one that has always been there. I love the Mighty Key building. That's really what the flavor of this needs to be, because I want this community to feel like it's always been there. They've always had this, that they've always had what everybody else had. These are just this is kind of the street view looking down toward the retail shops. And the development is called King's Crossings. King's Crossings in respect for Martin Luther King and the street that it sits on, and also for my Lord and King, Jesus. These are some other photos. Here's the clubhouse. Now this clubhouse will be primarily glass, so it'll be lots of transparency, and Blair Humphreys did wave his magic wand over the development and say, okay, now psychosocially you need to have this, and you need to make sure the buildings are arranged in this way, or just people won't interact. So again, lots and lots of feedback about how to make this come together. Lots of outdoor market opportunities. This last slide is truly where it shows the heart of our city. And I know, Andy, you got up and spoke about who had helped you, who had moved a stumbling block out of your way. And I tell you, this is just a small list of those people whose fingerprints are on this development. And this development is really just an idea whose time has come. And it is in part because we're changing the narrative in our city about human dignity and worthiness. And that's really what I heard with each one of you speakers that got up is a human dignity. And you know what? If wanting for my neighbor what I want for myself. I thank you for allowing me to share this. I'm excited for what's happening transformationally across our city, and thank you for having me.
Here to discuss bringing people home, regeneration through repopulation, the example of Vancouver, Vancouver's Living First strategy, please welcome back Larry Beasley.
Well, I am back, and I have to say that the presentations I saw this morning mean that some of the things I'm going to say you're already doing. And I hope that maybe a little bit of what I'm saying can be an inspiration to take those ideas a step further. In my presentation this morning, I talked about livability and sustainability as being very important for the future of cities. But that's kind of a theoretical thing. I think the average person asks very simple questions. Things like, what kind of a city is this going to be? Would I be interested in buying in this city? Would I want to live in the place? Would it be a better choice than my other choices? And we have great suburban choices in our country. And so would the urban choice be at all better? And I have to say, frankly, honestly, I can't answer these questions for Oklahoma City. I'm an outsider, only came here on Saturday. I've been walking my feet off. I've been trying to learn, but I don't really understand your setting and your history and your dynamics, the things that are driving you today. I see a kind of an optimism. I feel an optimism that's extraordinary, that's very special, and that you can really tap into. But as I said this morning, I can offer examples from elsewhere, places that have been transformed in their inner city, where people like yourselves, looking at projects, can then look at those things and say, yeah, this is possible, this is interesting for me. You can pass your own judgments, or you can say, no, this doesn't work, would not work here. So today I'm going to weave together a story of regeneration that comes from that experience, primarily in Vancouver, but I am going to use examples from elsewhere, all over the world, about the factors or the elements that are really essential for great cities in the modern world. I said that you're competing. Others have said that you're competing with all the great cities in the world, and I truly believe that. That was reinforced, I think, by what Jennifer was saying and others. I would say these are actually universal factors. And in the Vancouver case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, what was working, what has worked well. I'm going to also be honest and tell you some things that haven't worked well. I'm going to also tell you some things that I wish we had done, that we could have done, that we just didn't get into. So in a sense, the next 35 minutes or so is going to be a suggestive tale about possibilities, and it's going to be a cautionary tale as well about things that you might want to pay attention to and look out for as you move forward with a strategy of regeneration in the core of Oklahoma City. And this morning, like before, I'm going to use a lot of pictures, but I don't want you to take these pictures at face value. I want you to try to convert these images and these ideas to the unique scale of Oklahoma City and the unique personality of Oklahoma City. Someone else said it, and I'll say it again. The worst thing that could happen is that one city copies another city. That thing that's happening with globalization, we really have to avoid. So I hope more than anything that these pictures will kind of tweak possibilities that will add on to the very, very creative projects that I saw earlier this morning. And I have to start by saying I'm going to be talking about housing as a key to regeneration. And so I suggest a challenge in Oklahoma City. I suggest that over the next 20 years, you shoot for having 50,000 residents in your core city, from 7,500 that you have now to 50,000. That's not a really hard objective. It's very achievable. All the young people I saw in and of themselves could build housing for that. And I think it's a very good challenge or target for Oklahoma City over the next few years. Now, in talking about Vancouver as my example, I do want to start with an inspiration. I said this morning that the city doesn't happen by accident. It has to be designed, and that was best put to me by a colleague who has lived this in the trenches. His name is Jaime Lerner. He's the great mayor, one of the great mayors of the world of Curitiba in Brazil. And Jaime said this. He said, every city has to have a design. He said, a city without a design does not know where it's going, does not know how to grow. And really, that's the secret of everything that I'm going to be talking about this morning. But why is this relevant for Oklahoma City at this particular moment? You have a lot of energy. You have a lot of things happening. Well, the reason it's particularly relevant is because as you build out a strong regeneration strategy that obviously you're in the beginnings of, and you draw in vacant parcels, vacant land around you, and you revitalize those existing places that were languishing for so long, you're not going to just be doing a bunch of projects. You are going to dramatically change Oklahoma City forever. So let me show you what I mean by that by looking at my city. Here's a panorama of change in Vancouver. You can see this was very, very transformative. Everything that I'm going to show you today, all the ideas, all the public spaces, almost all the buildings did not exist just 25 years ago. So you're going to fundamentally change the image of Oklahoma City. You're going to change the brand of Oklahoma City. You're going to change how people see you in the region, but you're also going to change how people see you around the world. So, the challenge is you have to get this right. It is just as easy to recreate a negative image in the modern world as it is to create a positive image. So the whole picture of what I'm going to show you, I think, is very important at this particular moment in Oklahoma City. So let me get on with the elements that I think are very, very important and prove to be important in my city. The first factor that you need to really think about doesn't actually focus on the core city at all, but it's kind of a preamble to getting it right in the core city. And it deals with the regional context, the overall shape of the larger metropolis. We have to get it right in designing the basic metropolitan structure of the modern city. We've got to get it right in terms of regional land use and transportation arrangements. And the themes really in this are to save vital open space and particularly more and more agriculture, to allocate land uses so that we get things people want to do close together, and to offer a movement system that includes the car, accommodates the car. It will always be with us. It's a wonderful way to move around, but de-emphasizes it to some degree, but is still a way of building a city that's appealing to people, and then motivate where we can more compact growth. And in Vancouver, our regional metropolitan plan and a very unique and very effective agricultural land reserve was vital to everything that we achieved in our city. We now have a system of very secure green zones throughout the region. Development is clustered in very differentiated town centers. And this has created an effective growth boundary, or growth focus is maybe a better way to say it, that has preserved over 50% of the landmass in the region for the respite that we know is now needed when you have massive population growth. Cities that are forgetting this respite are experiencing all kinds of livability and health and other kinds of problems that occurs when you don't keep open space in the concept. We've become in Vancouver quite famous for what many call a very counterintuitive approach to transportation. You might know, if you visited Vancouver, that we do not have freeways fanning out from our core cities. In fact, there are no freeways in the city at all. We're limiting auto capacity into the core city. We have a rule that we won't expand the capacity by even one lane of traffic. And we're connecting those town centers with more and more rapid transit. And we're shooting for really movement choices, trying to build that transit infrastructure as quickly as we can, not just rail, but also streetcars and buses, but also adding in cycling, ferries in our case, because we have water, but mostly building the infrastructure for people on foot. And all of this in preference to the automobile. The automobile does have its place. It's very important. There are many trips that only can be done in the automobile, but we don't let the car distort all the other dimensions that create a great city. We don't let it trade off the magic of the city. Now, you can understand the struggle that we have. It's the same struggle that is happening all over the world, and that's the deep cultural romance that we have with the private car. Can we build the alternatives fast enough and good enough to compete with the car? I think the jury's still out on that. But I have learned one fundamental thing, and that is that the best transportation plan is actually a good land use plan. Simple proximity is way more powerful than any mechanical system to manage movement, for the obvious reason that it can cut dramatically the number of trips and the lengths of trips that are taken in a city. For example, in our downtown, we have seen a drop in car ownership and car use. We have less cars coming in and out of the core city than we had 10 years ago, even with all the dramatic new development that I'll be talking about later. Over 60% of all the trips in the core are now done by non-motorized modes, and that's mostly people walking. And that's a very unheard of kind of situation in North America. But here's the part I really like. Statistically, our people are thinner and they are healthier. They are the thinnest and the healthiest in all of Canada. And part of that's because of that approach. So as you start thinking about the bigger picture here in Oklahoma City, I think you should be looking at auditing the regional patterns that are here and realizing that it's an organic thing, that the core and the edges of a city have to find a mutually reinforcing harmony and balance. That kind of brings me to the second element. We've got to get it right in calibrating density with pervasive efforts for quality of life. The specifics are going to be different in every place because tolerances vary among consumers. But the themes are very consistent, bringing together development intensity, mixed use with community infrastructure, and then amenity values. All has to happen together. That's what the projects were about that we saw earlier today. Nothing can really be left out in this equation. Now in Vancouver, to this end, our most important policy has been a residentially based growth strategy that balances a natural inclination in the core for office growth, for commercial growth. We call it, in our case, our Living First strategy. And the reason for that is because every time we came up against a rule or a regulation that limited residential, we wiped it out. Residential came first for us. And it's based on a concept, first and foremost, of coherent neighborhood units, because consumers make housing choices not just on the quality of the house, but on everything that's essential for their day-to-day living. By the way, Susan, this is a downtown supermarket with underground parking that I was telling you about. And this includes the pedestrian scale. It includes all of the amenities and services at hand. It includes a kind of a concept that we call the high street at the center of a neighborhood that provides the places that people need in order to create their neighborhood culture. So the standard amenities that we require are listed here, and you'd look at it and say, well, of course you need those, but almost nowhere in modern cities are these kind of amenities consistently provided. And the targeted scale or basic scale that we're shooting for is listed here. And I know this concept of community or neighborhood is something that is very dear to you, not only in your historic areas, but I notice it as you're building out the new areas as well. Also essential is open space, and the public realm is used to contribute to that neighborhood identity and amenity. In our case, we have settled on the street as the focus of public life, so we include grass boulevards, double rows of trees, very lush landscaping to screen the density. We also push for beautiful private and enclosed courtyards. There's some 40 or 50 of these courtyards and glorious roof gardens throughout the city where residents can escape all that action out in the street for the safety and quiet of their own small garden. Now we understand at the same time, as you do understand as well, that ample public park space is vital. So in our case, we've added about 65 acres of new parks, and then everything in our case is tied together with a pervasive waterfront walkway and bikeway system that is really focused on that super amenity of the city for us, which of course is our water. And density is our goal. We want the city to be as compact and dense as we can make it. But we have found that with large-scale buildings, they have to be managed very carefully. You can't leave this to chance because otherwise there are some pretty unpleasant results. So we carefully regulate, in our case, design, including the quality of materials. We very aggressively preserve heritage We manage all of the day-to-day concerns like security and noise and privacy and all the interface conditions because of a quest of something we have called and has become very popular as a concept in the city, the concept of neighborliness. And my point in all this, as I said this morning, is that people usually hate density because it's been so poorly done. It's so unpleasant. But I don't blame them. But ample amenities, along with thoughtful design, really allow us to change that attitude among average consumers. So that's the case of Vancouver, but look at these cases. Here is Auckland and Copenhagen and even Rostock, examples where they're going in the same direction to bring that quality and architectural excellence. Now, the situation is not without its problems, and one of them I want to put on the table right up front, because it really is almost endemic to any bold strategy for densification. There are nearly uncontrolled impacts of frenzied new development on existing low-income areas, which are usually clustered near the inner city. All that development energy, unbridled, can be just another pressure to destabilize already vulnerable communities. So you have to beware of land speculation and gentrification, of ignoring the endemic social problems on the street, such as substance abuse and mental illness and poverty. This is a constant stress in our city, and it's something that is taking more and more of our energy and resources. And our experience proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that a good social development strategy must reinforce regeneration in your city. But I have to say, there is a more general formula for success when density and quality are tied together. The architectural solutions allow the density to work for everyone. The high density generates enough value, enough real dollars to carry quality construction, great on-site amenities, and a very nice contribution to the neighborhood's infrastructure. And then the supportive neighborhood draws all kinds of people that you didn't expect back to a truly urban lifestyle, making the city, in and of itself, all aspects of the city, much more vibrant from both an economic and a social perspective. And I think the results in Vancouver after about 20 years of this strategy should be quite optimistic for Oklahoma City. And our core city, our inner city, has more than doubled its population to over 110,000 people in little over a decade. And that continues to grow and thrive with a very, very strong and widening and expanding market. And the key to the whole thing was that we can't force people to do anything, but you can make it a preferred choice for them on their own terms. So that's what we've tried to do. Now, there's no question that civic design is also about social design. So the next factor I want to concentrate for better urbanism that we have to get right is social mix. The principle is that the city has to be accessible to everyone. That's what Susan was talking about before. And the more diverse is the mix of people, we've discovered the stronger and more robust is the civic, economic, and social culture. Our strategy in Vancouver caused us to have to face straight on this issue of social mix and to deal with it in a very methodical and systematic way. First, our strategy targets a genuine economic mix of both non-market and market housing in every multiple family neighborhood. In fact, we set aside 20% of the development areas in all neighborhoods, multiple family neighborhoods, for low-income people. So we're mixing it up. Now, everything is very mixed up together. We don't actually, many people ask me that, we don't press people of very different economic realities into the same building, but we put them very close together within buildings, among buildings. You know, the social housing providers as well as the condo sellers and purchasers talked about the issues. Well, we could avoid some of that and still get the mix by having this close intimacy of buildings in a neighborhood. Second, the mix also includes a mix of unit and household types. When you're building at high density, you need to build for special needs people, also for seniors and for children. For example, in addition to the apartment and townhouse units, as I've been showing you a lot, we have facilitated live-work units, lofts, artist studios, and in our case, again, back to the water, even houseboats. But the biggest quest has been for households with children. And I want to pause and concentrate on the issue of family housing, partly because I think it is an untapped opportunity here in Oklahoma City, but mostly for a much simpler reason, a demographic reason. And that is that most households still have children. There's not enough of those natural downtown consumers, the young singles and the empty nesters, to create a dependable, sustained, strong market for regeneration. So in Vancouver, we have special guidelines for family housing density, at higher density, and we expect and we look for 25% of all the units in every single project to be designed to meet those guidelines. So what do the guidelines talk about? Well, at the unit level, appropriate bedroom count and separation of bedrooms from active areas, child-proof finishes, private open space for supervised outside time, minimum storage provisions, in-suite or in-unit laundry, among the kind of day-to-day needs that families have. For the building, clustering of family units for mutual support, secure and visible semi-public outdoor spaces where children can play, but also the biggest issue for families where children and families can meet one another. And then family gathering places for gardening, especially gardening. That's a very big issue for families. And very importantly, a lot of grade level units with separate entrances, because a lot of people are afraid of heights, or they might want a dog. Dogs are huge in the repopulation of cities, or they just might want their own front door. For the neighborhood, it's about an adequate number and quality of parks and schools. I was again thrilled to see the elementary school coming together here in Oklahoma City, and community facilities and childcare. Also safe areas that are protected from traffic cross streets. We call them areas of tranquility, and nearby transit. And the fascinating thing is that these guidelines actually help the developer to expand their market. And once they really clued into that aspect, the guidelines have been very well received, they're very popular, and frankly at this point we don't even hardly use them at all because the developments naturally include most that's needed. I also have to say in hindsight that we could have done more. Let me give you just a couple of examples where we could have gone further. And a lot of it has to do with seeing the multiple family unit as really a surrogate for the single family home, and then trying to replicate as many of the features of a single family home that you can in a multiple unit. For example, in downtowns all over North America, we really need to update our thinking about parking. For all kinds of practical reasons and historic reasons, suburban home parking is free, it's private, and it's flexible. And that's rarely the case in the inner city. Let's look at the typical urban garage. Most multiple family dense developments have parking. It's usually grade separated parking the more dense you get, and that's a good thing, but it makes it expensive. So it means these spaces have to be used for more than just storing a car, and they would benefit from a lot more privacy and a lot more security. Look at your average single family garage. I mean, you do everything in there except park a car. And that has to be the same thing that happens in urban garages. We need to have areas where people can do many kinds of things. This gentleman is an outlaw. What he is doing there is illegal, and it's true that we have to change almost all of our regulations in order to allow him to do what he should just simply be able to do. Or let's talk about the flexibility of a unit's space. Family needs are constantly changing in the lifestyle of a typical family, and people need to be able to shift around their space as easily as you do in a single-family home. You know, more kids come, or a parent wants to stay with you, you have to care for a parent, or you know, you have a high mortgage and you'd like to have a secondary suite for a few years. But we've come to so tightly regulate from all aspects, multiple family buildings, that this sort of flexibility has been totally edited out. And that alone causes families sometimes just to say no to this alternative. But those have been the problems, but I have to say that the guidelines have worked surprisingly well for us. Let me just give you a sense of that performance. Families are flooding back to the downtown in Vancouver in record numbers. We have several thousand row houses now downtown, which we piloted especially for families, creating a housing option that just simply did not exist in our city before. And the number of kids in the city, the inner city, is growing by leaps and bounds. We have over 8,000 children downtown on the downtown peninsula at this point, and that's more than any individual single-family inner city neighborhood around it. Over 29, almost 30% of downtown household units that have been built in this generation include children. And then there's a very cool spin-off benefit that we've discovered, and that is if you design an area that works well for children, for a child, it works well for everyone else. Now, there are several important problems to keep in mind and to manage as you go into this kind of situation. Inevitably, a popular city undergoing sustained regeneration creates affordability problems and exacerbates affordability problems for housing. This happens in every city on the planet that is turning itself around. And this got away from us to a degree in Vancouver. Even with our 20% policy for low-income people, we still have homelessness in the city. Our waiting lists for social housing are still there, even though now we have a special initiative to try to house several thousand of those deeply, deeply troubled and difficult people to house. But that's not really where the big problem is. The big problem is the middle income pressures on affordability, which are starting to soar, and they're much harder to solve because a lot of people, taxpayers, don't want to invest in a middle income person's housing in any way, shape, or form. And we found that we have to start to think about that as European cities are thinking about it. You cannot be complacent when it comes to this issue, or almost everything else you're trying to do in your regeneration strategy will start to unravel. From the very beginning of regeneration, you need to have a coherent strategy for wide affordability built into the equation. Now, a related factor to social mix and diversity is, of course, culture. Smart cities who want to be competitive and remembered and loved will find a way to express themselves through the great cultural institutions that link them up with the world culture, but even more importantly, through the more modest avant-garde ventures that generate a community culture. They will create venues where people can celebrate in mass, as you're going to have on your new Central Park, occasionally also to protest, as this case in San Francisco shows. And I have to say here, Vancouver is not the best model in the world. While we have expanded our Congress facilities and we've added our stadium and we have a new science museum, we're only beginning now to think about growing our art gallery and new music and visual arts institution. Frankly, from a cultural perspective, we've kind of fallen behind. So that's kind of a hesitant story, but these examples here in Toronto or here in Abu Dhabi, I think are much better cases. Or I really like one very nearby, the Arts District in Dallas. An extraordinary accomplishment of arts and culture around which a lot of other great things are happening. A special school of arts has been opened there. A wonderful new park right over a freeway that clusters housing around it. The point is that one of the great anchors to make downtowns competitive over their suburbs and with the rest of the world is a handy availability of culture. I must say, I love this program you have to market your city. It's one of the best in the world. I embrace it. I want to steal it. That's the bottom line. So culture does need to be a strong part of regeneration. But now I want to move to the heart of urban design. The next factor for a great city in getting things right is the built form. The principle is that there is a natural built form that responds to the different setting and public tastes of every city, whether that is low-rise or high-rise. Of course, I will say honestly in Vancouver, even the Prince of Wales says this, that the high-rise is our preferred form. And so we've had a whole generation of this, but also now we're beginning to experiment with the mid-rise forms, because people in our city just want to get up so they can see those views of the mountains and the water. But that may or may not be relevant here in Oklahoma City. Maybe a lower profile is much more compelling. Here's a great example from Rotterdam in the Netherlands of a lower profile. And actually, most of the smartest cities in the world, I'm now finding, seem to prefer the mid-rise over the high-rise. And that has to do with the market that's there from moment to moment. But whatever the height is, what we have found in complex buildings is that you have to get the architecture right or the whole proposition falls apart. The success or failure of livability rests in the details, in the tiny aspects that create a project. Now in Vancouver we have very tall, thin towers, unusually small floor plates to get people up to see those views. We then separate those towers so that people behind can see through them. We broker private views as well as public views. And then in the mid-rise scenarios that we're starting to look at and develop for ourselves, we have to sculpt buildings to open up vistas and to provide light. What we did learn from cities like Vienna is that unless you sculpt these buildings, the mid-rise can start to have problems very soon. But equally important in all of this is a strong, coherent, dominant street wall with the traditional scale of buildings, with the bases of taller buildings really shielded from the sidewalk. And this helps to cut their powerful impact if you're walking along. This allows them to float almost out of your consciousness. And this, we have found, is a very simple way to humanize those tall buildings. It's also very important to have active residential down at grade level as much as possible. We like the shop house where we can get it along a residential or a commercial street, but much more importantly, we're shooting for row houses to truly domesticate the street. This means no blank walls. It means lots of doors and porches and stoops and windows and almost any fascinating detail down at eye level. Just don't let it be blank down there. This includes weather protection along the commercial routes or the retail routes. Essentially, within the first 3 floors, there needs to be a kind of fascinating, intimate urbanism that engenders a very strong sense of place, of comfort, of hominess, of civility, of safety, and of vivid memory, and frankly, of economic value and more value and more value. With that, the shape and the character, not just the amount, but the character and shape of open space is important. So we avoid those useless private plazas. We call those pigs in space, where you have a tower and it's just in a big plaza. And instead, we want buildings to shape our public parks. And then all of the public places are embellished with public art. And of course, like you, we have to manage sun and shade a lot. Now, we do it to keep people warm, you do it to keep people cool, but it's really the same kind of very careful consideration that can transform the experience for the average person. And then in our case, we sculpt our entire skyline, both as a work of art, but also to protect key public view sheds and view corridors, and to make sure that new development reinforces what's behind it rather than killing what's behind it. It's bad when you build a new area and in the same time you kill off an old area. Well, you can guess the problem if you're a developer in particular. How do you balance those public objectives with the private market objectives that drive development? How much regulation or involvement of the public sector can a developer tolerate? Will the amenity values be enough to increase and improve developer profits? And I can testify that after years of looking at this and working with hundreds of developers, in our case at least, the answer is yes. In Vancouver, for the development community and the real estate community, business has never been better. So developers are very cooperative with this system. They hire great architects, they bring them in, we work together, and we get great buildings as a result. And many other cities are confirming this same experience. Now I want to move to what you might call the new frontier of urban design, the unavoidable responsibility for the environment, getting it right on all the key factors that are currently degrading, as I mentioned this morning, our natural systems and ecologies. We must create an alternative infrastructure that is compatible with the natural environment. And our best case in Vancouver is our Athletes Village from the 2010 Olympics. It's now just known as the Village, as you see here, and it's become our most recent testing grounds for that sustainable urbanism, to make a high-density, socially, environmentally, and economically successful place. Phase 1 is now built, as you start to see from these images. It's occupied with people, so you can see what this new frontier looks like on the ground. In the Village, ultimately, we will house 15,000 people, and they will enjoy a complete neighborhood that really pushes the boundaries then in terms of an aggressive energy scheme, an advanced water management scheme, an innovative waste management arrangement, very high green building requirements or standards, an urban agriculture initiative, a diverse transportation offering emphasizing those alternative modes, and very importantly, provisions for environmental stewardship and learning. And I'm proud to say that it's achieved a designation as a LEED Platinum community, one of the very few in North America, which is it's a big accomplishment at this point anywhere in the world. Now, there is a problem. How do you demystify the whole thing of the environment and environmentally responsible development for not just the developer? Many developers are way onto this ahead of other people, but to the consumer. Environmental responsibility ultimately cannot come as a premium. It has to be regularized. And that's still a struggle everywhere. It's a struggle here, it's a struggle in any city, but it is getting easier with new products and new technologies every day. And then the final thing I want to talk about has to do with process. That last element for a better city that we have to get right, which is very hard to do in many cases, but which you are ahead of most cities on, is getting it right with civic governance and growth management. And in many cities, this is proving an impossible barrier. The key principle is inclusiveness of the process, flexibility of the laws and systems to satisfy everyone's needs, and then collaboration and mediation among all the various diverse interests. And in Vancouver, unlike your history, we really had to reinvent our government, reinvent City Hall, and it was a total reform. We created something we now call the cooperative planning approach, where citizens and developers and city officials are really motivated to joint venture so that everyone benefits. I mean, you call it teamwork. We call it something else. And we found that that confrontational perspective, which had been endemic in our system in the past of, developers and City Hall fighting, was just too limiting. We couldn't cope with the glorious projects that we had in our minds, in our dreams, with that kind of system. And for us, that started with a very clear, convincing overall vision of the future city that was generated at City Hall through very strong civic leadership. Meant also a very proactive planning agenda and very discretionary development management laws that are very light on hard regulations, but they're very heavy on expectations, along with targets and incentives and bonuses to make the right things viable and to garner public goods. And then everyone is then motivated through the process to work together to broker those public and private trade-offs that really make for a great scheme when you do the final development. We incorporate pervasive and sustained public involvement every step along the way. We use all kinds of formats. We maintain a continuous discussion with our citizens. But at the same time, we separate out professional advice and input on proposals in the form of peer review. Not just citizen review, but peer review, because the fact is that community demands and the art of building the city both have to have their own balances. You know, true greatness has to be in a city's very DNA. And that's where these elements that I've talked about today really become quite important as you move forward with regeneration here in Oklahoma City. Let Vancouver be a testimonial, the result of an audacious, holistic redevelopment strategy has led to this. This second Vancouver panorama, I think, portends to what Oklahoma City is right on the verge of creating, within your reach, because of the assets that you have well in hand and the governance and the energy you have here, is a city that will be connected and will at the same time avoid the geography of nowhere that is really sweeping the planet with globalization, a city that will be popular with your citizens, a city that will pay its own way, a city that will have 24-hour vitality, lively street life, tourist appeal, but a city that will also be beautiful and approachable and charming, a city that's working for more people, leaving less people behind with personal or social alienation, and a city that's on a very solid foundation for the future, enticing new kinds of people that we never thought to come and live in the city, creating a diversified, catalytic economy and social culture and cultural base that we know we need. And I think this is what you're up to here in Oklahoma City. I hope this is a bit of an inspiration. I think you have the most extraordinary opportunity. Thank you very much.
It is now time for our super panel roundtable discussion, and so we're going to come up here and have a conversation about some of the things that we've heard, but this is also an opportunity for you to be more involved. There are question cards on your table, and so if you have a question that you would want one of our primary speakers to answer, feel free to fill that out, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. And let me, with that, bring back up our presenters. Returning, here's Larry Beasley, and from the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program, Jennifer Bradley. Well, again, thank both of you. And I know the question cards are coming up. We've already got, I guess, 3 of them handed up here. I wanted to start with, my first instinct when I saw what you all were going to be discussing was whether there's some distinct differences here. But I'm interested in hearing the two of you, what synergy you saw. What did you see in Larry's presentation that you think is applicable to what you were trying to communicate today?
I think that's a great question, because too often the economic development and the spatial development, communities and practitioners seem to be going on 2 tracks that never really intersect. But as we learn more and more about how innovation happens and how the great things that occur in cities happen, we realize that it comes about through intentional physical design. We used to have in the mid-century in the United States a vision that ideas happened best in kind of knockoffs of New England liberal arts colleges, right? You would put smart people in campuses surrounded by trees and birds and grass, and you made sure that they interacted with their team members, but they were completely isolated, almost like a Los Alamos project, from other thinkers. You know, God forbid that they would ever talk to somebody from a competitive company. Now we're understanding that as problems get much more complicated, you need a range of people. You need companies to come together and collaborate more on solutions. You need suppliers and retail. You need everybody who has their hands on a project, much like Michael Ming was talking about. GE needs to talk to its customers all the time. It needs to talk to the great scientists that are here all the time. The physical environments that are conducive to that are dense, There's a lot of circulation. There's a lot of people walking around, bumping into somebody and saying, oh, you know, I actually do need to talk to you because I'm working on this thing. Maybe you can help me with it. We don't know when we start the day all of the questions that we're going to have, all the people that we need to see. A built environment that is dense, that is circulatory, that has a lot going on, will help us answer the questions that we don't even know that we need to ask. And that's what leads to more innovation. So that's what I really took from Larry's presentation, that there is absolutely a physical component to invention. And the more we can support that, the better we are in all aspects of our life, right? From our brain to our hearts to our relationships.
Larry, likewise.
Well, I, on the other hand, really took to heart one of your messages, which was identity, that each city has to find its true reason economically, but I would extend that to say physically, socially, and everything else. It's why I always have a little bit of problem even presenting images from my city, for example, because I think here you're at a time where you're starting to explore very new kinds of buildings and projects, and that invention to make it genuinely Oklahoma City, not something that you might see, you know, even in Dallas nearby, is very important. I felt that this morning in the FAST presentations, but I think Jennifer really reinforced that for me, which is it's just got to be unique to your city. It's got to be special to your city. You don't want to say, I'm like another city. You want another city to say they're like you. And I think that that's very important at every aspect of city building.
Larry, let's talk about density. How do you best create density? We know a handful of variables. People want good schools. They want good public transportation options. They want a variety of things. But if you were going to have to start with one or two or prioritize, how do you create density in an urban environment?
I've come to the conclusion that it's more than about amenities and schools and things. Because I've seen people living in dense circumstances where they don't have all those things that they hoped they would have. The one thing that seems to be just an unavoidable reality is experience. It seems to be that if you can design, no matter what the density, whether it's modestly low density or very high density, but in a way that the experience I have when I enter that space and that building, or I'm with my family or whatever, that experience is meaningful, touches you, then for you it works. And once you make that emotional connection with that, all of a sudden that opens up the economic issues and everything else that comes together, because then you'll say, you know, Mary, why don't we try it? And what often happens, you'll find in a city, a great city that's really designing itself well, is a person will say, you know, John, I think we should go and spend the weekend at a hotel and see if we like it. And then when they have a great weekend, they go, maybe we might not have that 45-minute commute back and forth. Maybe we could have an hour and a half with our children. You know, John, you're coming home now when the kids are gone to bed. That doesn't need to be the reality. So it really is experience. There's a great movement, I think, in the retail industry, and it was mentioned today about how people are buying experience. Look at Starbucks. You pay $2.50 for a 10-cent commodity. But what you're really buying is the experience of Starbucks. And we have to bring that to cities.
Jennifer, you talked a lot about city governments and regional economies, and density is very important to creating an efficient government. You can deliver the services on a much more efficient basis if people are living more close together. We all know the issues of Atlanta and how they've spread out, and Denver is another great example. And you know, we are another example on a just smaller scale of a city that had way too much urban sprawl for a lot of wrong reasons. How important is it to overcome some of those densities issues if you're going to build a stronger regional economy? Is there a correlation between the two?
I think we're at a moment now where we're starting to get over some of our old ideas about city versus suburbs. We're starting to understand that there's not kind of a pitched battle between, you know, the traditional high density, high problem city and a low-density, problem-free suburb. I think any suburban mayor will say there's no such thing as a problem-free suburb. As we start to rethink what these places are like, we appreciate that cities have low-density areas and suburban areas can have high-density areas. In Washington, D.C., where I live and have lived for the past 2 decades, in Austin, where I grew up, you have suburbs that are dense with companies and research institutions. So the way you harness the power of density at a metropolitan level is through transportation options that link these places. So you can move easily from, to take the Austin example, from the density of the Dell campus outside of Austin and Round Rock to the University of Texas, right, which is in downtown Austin, to some of the manufacturing and fabrication that's out in Leander, which is in another part of the town, to another university, which is south. So how do you connect these places so that you can harness your nodes of density throughout a region and have them come together to be really more than the sum of their parts? I don't think the question is that we should try and put all of the density in one place. That can, that has the effect of devaluing places where there really is something going on. The key is to connect them and to do so in an efficient way that people, again, have an enjoyable experience. If transit is a terrible experience, no one will use it. But we have a lot of examples of transit being a positive experience, particularly with the millennial generation. I like to joke that people have really absorbed the message of don't text and drive. And in a lot of places, they've said, okay, I won't drive, right? So they will stay on the bus and on the metro, and they're like this the whole time. Well, we can take advantage of that to connect our places in ways that we haven't before.
Larry, you know enough about Oklahoma City, I think, to answer the question of public transit in a community that had land use issues that allowed people to just spread around and didn't necessarily go in a linear growth pattern. How would you advise a city like Oklahoma City to start taking steps in a public transportation direction?
Well, I stay with that principle that the best transportation plan is a land use plan. There has been a kind of a false dichotomy in the world of urban planning for probably 25, 30 years, and that is that you have low density and high density, and that's your choices. And I've been watching consumers over the last few years, and consumers have discovered something which is very relevant to your question, which is modest medium density. And I'll put it specifically. Consumers have rediscovered the 30s streetcar neighborhood. In every city in North America, this is happening big time. What used to be dead and dying communities are now all in a revival. I mean, you have it, and all of your inner city neighborhoods are in a revival. Those neighborhoods are medium, lowish, medium density. They are high enough density that transit actually can pay for itself. We know that you only need about 40 units per acre for transit to pay for itself. It's not hard to get to 40 units per acre. In fact, most streetcar neighborhoods are at 40 units per acre. How do they do it? Well, it's a bigger house and it's broken into a couple of apartments, and then there's apartment back over the garage, and many infills, and then occasionally there's a few townhouses and an apartment building or two along the commercial street above the retail, and those function very well. The high density downtown and the transit-oriented centers provide you the easy ability to get that rapid transit in the equation. You can only get that with that high density because it's very expensive to do. But this low to medium density is very effective with streetcars, buses, the lower cost transit alternatives. What that does is then it builds a transit habit, that people get out of the idea that every single thing they want to do, they get in their car and they do the simplest thing, the most complex thing in their car. They start thinking about, well, I'd rather just take the bus down to the store, those kind of things. And once that develops, then people begin to put two and two together. We're now saying in some cities to the outer suburbs, go and audit those streetcar suburbs and see what you could do in simple terms to convert those very, very low density outer suburbs to be just a little bit higher density. So you don't have to fight about heights and towers and all those things that make people so upset. You just say, a little bit of gentle density here, a little bit of gentle density there, taking an old strip mall and turning it into a bit of housing, makes transit work. And by the way, it makes all other services in the city work as well and pay for themselves.
Jennifer, you touched on urban versus suburban, but there's even a larger divide in many parts of America that's urban versus rural. And in fact, the cover of Governing Magazine takes on that very topic this month. State legislators in many states are led by rural legislators who don't necessarily feel much sympathy for people who live in urban areas, and the funding is disproportionate. Have you studied that from an economist's point of view?
One of the things that we have come to realize is we have a lot of overlapping definitions and ways we talk about things, and that's why we use the term metropolitan as much as we can. A lot of the residents of metropolitan areas actually live in rural areas. A metro is simply a commuter shed, right? It's people who live in counties that are adjacent to a big, a reasonably big urban center and who have a reasonable amount of commuting overlap. When you look at it from an economic standpoint, you see that it's not an urban versus rural divide, but more of an urban versus rural symbiosis. So urban areas, or urbanized areas, or metro areas, are where rural people find transportation for their goods. It's where they find financing. It's where they find education and health services. So the health of one feeds and supports the health of the other, particularly as we start to have a moment of more localism, right? Local food, local production, and appreciating all of the things that not just the city, but the surrounding area provides. The challenge is finding those people in the legislature who can serve as bridges, and I think there's a huge opportunity for our suburban legislators who frequently have tried to turn their back on the cities and differentiate themselves from the cities and say, we are not like that, that's not our scene. And allied with the rural areas, well, why can't they be bridges? Why can't they be the ones who, they're not only physically in between more rural areas and more urban areas, but I think, a lot of places are in transition. They're moving either towards a more urban density or they've just been a rural area. They have the opportunity to say, why would we waste our time fighting? The health of our state generally depends on the health of our metropolitan areas. You as rural residents have something to gain from this. You as urban residents also need to show appropriate, respect for what the rural elements of our state provide. I think that's a great opportunity, and I think that the states that get it and the suburban legislatures that get it will really vault ahead of places that are stuck in that old, fruitless, me versus them battle.
There is a lot of differences between the way cities fund themselves, their revenue sources. In the state of Oklahoma, municipalities draw over half their money from sales tax, which leads to certain policies and objectives. Do either of you have opinions on the best way to fund local governments and on the repercussions of relying more heavily on sales tax and other revenue sources?
Well, an economist is better to speak to this, but I'll speak more generally, maybe more as a comparison, say, between the Canadian system and the American system. I've come to the conclusion that because of the expectation of urban consumers, you need every possible source that you can think of. And the really smart cities are the ones that are using all of those sources. For example, we're just beginning to discover in Canada tax increment finance districts. By the same token, I don't know if you know, but everything I showed you in those pictures of Vancouver was paid for by the development community. Not a cent of taxpayers' money went into any of that. But we have a zoning system that creates wealth and sequesters wealth so that it goes to that developer. We never touch that developer's profit. But that huge land value increase that happens when you, as the mayor and the council, says you can go from an industrial to high-density residential, that huge land value can be shared if, in fact, it hasn't been scooped off by a land speculator before. So if you design your zoning in the right way, you'll create and sequester wealth, and then you can use that. And literally, probably $1 billion worth of public goods that you saw, and you saw it's quite lavish public goods, was paid for in that way. And I think that's a system that could be enjoyed in that collaboration here in America.
Jennifer, in the last 2008-2009 economic slowdown, we saw a lot of communities that relied on property taxes lose their tax base as property values decrease, and suddenly they couldn't provide the services. In Oklahoma, as I mentioned, we rely on sales tax. Do you see a model out there that you think is ideal? If you were going to begin a state today with the idea that local governments could flourish under this system, what would it look like?
I would encourage a system in which local governments can share resources, and that I think means the state setting a platform for similar computer systems, similar resources and rates. You know, we have made so many barriers in keeping local governments from collaborating and sharing in our local government code. In Ohio, for example, it's illegal for communities to share a coroner. Well, why? Why does it matter whether your coroner is in one, your public coroner is in one community or another? And we find over and over again that there are these artificial barriers to collaborating and sharing services. One of the things that the recession did was show people a price tag for hyperlocalism. And a lot of people decided they weren't willing to pay, that they would rather collaborate and share services. So I would make that easier. I would also figure out, again, more kind of innovative tax systems like TIFs, like other systems that can allow everybody to profit from the increased land value that government investment and public investment can do. And I would also think creatively about referendums. Some of the most successful public investments that we've seen across the country in the last few years have come when local people agree to tax themselves. They literally are putting their money into their streets, into their subway lines. And most people are tax averse in the abstract, but if the people can make a strong case that this is what your money is going for, and this is the benefit, and this is the transparency, people will say, yeah, I want to invest in the future of our community. So I think that's also an important point.
We seem to be going through a series of trends that is now led to almost every large city has some sort of downtown revitalization going on. The cities are coming back.
Yep.
At what expense? Are suburban areas suffering because of the urban revitalization? And if so, what's the next stage? Are we going to run into a situation down the line where it's the suburbs that are going to need the help and the attention down the line? Because there's hundreds of thousands of homes in this city and in other cities around the country built in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. And with more and more attention going into the urban core, what's going to happen to that next ring out?
I'll hop in and say, I don't think that we should revive the urban-suburban dichotomy. I didn't think it was a good idea when the suburbs were on top. I don't think it's a good idea to revive it when cities are on top. I think having a strong and robust urban core is great for suburban property markets. I'm not actually an economist. I'm a lawyer who hangs out with a lot of economists. And there's a lot of my economist friends have done great research that shows the symbiosis as opposed to the zero-sum competition. I think that what we're seeing now is a wave of suburban reinvention. I think suburbs are getting denser. I think suburbs are getting wonderfully diverse. If you look at a lot of the communities in the United States, a lot of metropolitan areas, suburbs are where immigrant communities are taking root, particularly in these sort of 1950s style suburbs where housing might be a little cheaper. This becomes a great jumping off point for people who have come to this country to make a contribution and make a difference. It can be a place where people really start their journey in America up the economic ladder. So I think understanding the benefit of different scales, different forms, different kinds of communities at the metropolitan level is a wonderful thing, rather than thinking, okay, there are only a finite number of 18 to 34-year-olds, on the planet, and we've got to get as many as we can. No, people live in a metropolitan area at different densities, different scales, different places throughout their lifetime. And the strongest communities are places that can offer that kind of spectrum for people wherever they are on their preference scale and wherever they are in their life stage. And that usually takes more than one community.
I think it also, you have to look back at the simple statistics. Even with all the extraordinary regeneration that's going on in our cities across North America, in Canada, still 60% of people are choosing suburban housing choices. In America, it's close to 70% are still choosing suburban housing choice. It's a great way to live. It's very convenient. It's often cheaper housing for people. It is where immigrants and those modest income people can get a foothold. It also is where there's lavish natural amenities still in many places. Now we could argue, and we're probably in a room of urbanists, so we could say they're not the kind of places we want, and to some degree that's true from the point of view of the experience of suburbanites. But I think it's going to be a long time before the suburbs really suffer because of urban revitalization. In fact, the truth of modern life is that the city is such a huge organism that it has to sprawl over a whole array of different kinds of living environments. It's also, in a free society, there have to be multiple choices. The reason we have to do urban regeneration is there was no urban choice when we came into, say, 15 years ago, 20 years ago in America and North America, and so we're rebuilding that choice. Then we're rebuilding the middle density choice. There's the low density choice. There's the rural choice. All of it has to happen to accommodate, in your case, 350 million people, in our case, 35 million people, in the case of Germany, 250 million people, in the kind of landscapes that we have to work with. The problem with suburbs now, from a governance point of view, is that they are not arranged so that they can pay for themselves, so that they can deliver. There is, in fact, an export of taxes often to suburban locations. You take for granted that the street system is going to be built. And yet, if you want to make an improvement to an inner city street system, as you well know, you have to have a very clever funding arrangement and you have to work with a lot of people, and it's very difficult. Those are the kind of inequities that do have to be addressed, and we do have to come up with different models. But in the end, if we shift 10% more of the density as households are forming, I say if you could get only 3 of every 10 households forming in this city this year to make an urban choice, you would have unlimited demand on the urban side. That means we have a bigger problem out in the suburbs because we have a very unsustainable situation out there. I keep telling my students, for a planner, an urban designer, an economist, the suburbs are the amazing challenge for their generation. And if they don't get that right, we're probably going to be in big trouble. But it's not going to be to convince suburbanites to all live a very highly urban lifestyle. That's never going to happen.
Larry, you've been here just long enough to kind of know what the plans are, but as you know, Oklahoma City relocated the interstate highway that went through its downtown a few blocks to the south. Now the opportunity to figure out how that has changed our city and how we react to it. Your thoughts based on the limited amount of information you've seen, and I know you've walked and you've looked at it a little bit, what are your thoughts on those plans?
Well, the first thing is, I think the Central Park strategy that you have underway is as audacious as I've seen in any city. The fact of public space and public park space can cluster around it billions of dollars of other private activity. So it's an amazing strategy. I've been driven all over the site. I've looked at everything. I got my juices were flowing because as an urbanist, it just is a glorious project. I do think now you need a very contemporary plan for the neighborhood around the park. I know you have a great design for the park. I think you need to target that population. I think it's a perfect place to really have a wide offering of family housing. And I think it's a place that you can incentivize all the kind of architectural things that we saw this morning among those young developers to start happening on maybe a slightly larger scale. And I think the other thing we've learned in many cities is those single pilot projects, whether it was Falls Creek North or Battery Park in New York or many others in many cities, those are the ones that do two things. They change the image of the city powerfully in a few years, and they change the attitude of consumers about the city. That's hard to do when it's a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit over here and sometimes there, and I might discover it or I might not. But when you see a whole neighborhood come and it's wonderful for families, all of a sudden people say, Oklahoma City, that's a family city. That's a place where families can live at great densities with wonderful schools and amenities and et cetera, and the consumer sees it.
The old corridor, addressing it with a new boulevard, what should we be watching out for? What advice would you give us on creating this new street to take the place where the old interstate highway was once located?
Well, I think the art is not to turn it into another highway by accident. And that is a very hard thing to avoid. When you take the highway standards that will be applied and the driving speeds and that will be applied, it'll be very easy to be convinced at a political level and at a bureaucratic level that, well, it needs to be just a little bit wider and a little less of this, a little less of that. I commend to you to turn this into a true, elegant, almost, I dare say it, and you'll probably all boo me, but almost like a 19th century elegant boulevard. Because I think when you do that, all of a sudden, instead of something that is a barrier to things around it, which the old freeway was, it becomes an integrator. It becomes something where you build energy and you bring energy together. It's a great way to also, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to give people that first experience of coming to the inner city from both directions. So I would see it as a gateway and bring the best urban design prowess that you can from the whole country and from your city, where you have great designers as well, into that equation. Do not settle for an average street.
And I would just add that as you think about what's going to happen on the buildings around the boulevard, you think intentionally about how you support entrepreneurs' innovation. Do you have sufficient lab and commercialization space for spin-offs? Do you have a place where researchers and entrepreneurs and marketing and salespeople can come together? Do you have those kind of third spaces where you could have, whether that's a pop-up or whether you could have a tech meetup, whether you could have all of the kinds of network building capacity that would also create a buzz, that Oklahoma City is not just a place that's designing its physical environment, but it's also designing a space that it allows creative people to connect with each other, to meet with each other, to realize their dreams, right? As more people become one-person entrepreneurs, where will they have their business meetings? If you can create a cool space that's got a buzz both physically and economically, that's an amazing opportunity that most places would kill for. So I would just add that extra element into it.
I know one local government, for example, that now has a director of animation. Very clever idea, because it allows you to choreograph the kind of things that you've just been talking about without using your regulatory powers at all. You use your entrepreneurial powers, your influence powers, but you need an agent for that.
Make this the last question, and Jennifer, I'll pose it to you. You've studied regional economies. We're all vaguely aware, at least, of California's issues and some businesses wanting to exit. There's a trend toward being south and west and strong economies in the past in Arizona and in Texas. Right now, the economies in the center part of the country seem to be doing really well. The Texas, Oklahoma, all the way up into North Dakota. There's the Florida economies and the issues that they faced with natural disasters. Going forward, what trends do you see in which parts of the country are going to have the most success economically?
I don't know that it's, I hesitate to answer things like that, because then people who are not in the favored zone feel like, oh, well, we got, we're Atlanta, I guess we're dead now, we have to give up. I think that the places that will do well are the places that can capitalize on what's happening now, but also never lose sight of what might be happening next, right? The middle of the country is benefiting from an energy and natural resources boom. I grew up in Texas. I know that energy boom is like night follows day, followed by energy bust or energy shakeout. So as you know, the brilliant folks at GE are developing ideas around the current energy economy, I am sure they are also developing ideas around the next energy economy. The places that will succeed, whether they are on the coasts, on the borders, in the middle, wherever, are the places that are constantly imagining what is the next thing. What is going to continue to animate and sustain our economy, and how do we create a place where new ideas and the people who can implement them can constantly connect and see their dreams realized? Because no place has global trends behind it forever. So what you want to do is build a place that's so strong and is so resilient that when one part of your economy hits a bump, you have a lot of other possibilities that can keep you going. And so you get out of the boom and bust cycle, and you're not necessarily dependent on some market rate that's set somewhere else. You are the place that's in control of your own destiny because you have the tools, you have the entrepreneurs, you have the thought leaders, you have the sense of vision and possibility and hope. Wherever you are geographically, that's where you need to be civically and mentally and communally.
Jennifer Bradley and Larry Beasley. Let's show our visitors a nice round of applause. I'm going to kind of wrap up the day with a few collected thoughts. Usually when I speak, I try to have some sort of theme. You know, it's typical of a speech. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And for whatever reason, this year I just collected a series of notes over the last few days, things that have been on my mind lately that I thought might be appropriate at an audience like this. And so I don't necessarily know that it'll have a beginning and a middle and an end, but I think it might be a good way for us to take stock of how far we've come and some thoughts on economies and ours and what opportunities we might have to make in the future. A lot of this is on my mind because not too long ago, I had visiting our city, a little bit under the radar screen, a CEO and a mayor. And I think they had a couple of people with them, but generally it was the CEO of a mayor. And the CEO was of a company that you would know. It was a very large business somewhere else. And it was an interesting trip because we've only had a couple like this one. They weren't looking to relocate. In fact, the first thing they said is we have absolutely no intentions of moving from our community. But we want our community, he said, to do better. And I have long believed that you are not going to have companies with high standards in cities with low standards. That the private sector is going to reflect the public sector's attention to detail, quality of design, and that the public sector in many ways is going to help set the stage for the private sector to build upon it. And this CEO and mayor have come to our city because they had perceived that we had sort of figured this out. They knew a little bit about our story. They knew we had figured it out the hard way, but that we had nonetheless figured this out. And in talking to the CEO, it was apparent that he had this really productive, large Fortune 500 company, but he just didn't have the infrastructure around his campus. He wasn't able to attract a workforce that wanted to live very close by where the headquarters were located. And the mayor didn't lack enlightenment. I think there's a tendency, if you go to a city and you see things that you think are less than desirable, that somehow the mayor doesn't understand that things should or could be better. Typically, there are obstacles that have been inherited from previous generations that are very difficult to overcome, and that was the case this time. You see, there are there are always social issues placed on the plate of those elected officials at City Hall and local governments. And they're hard to get around, they're hard to look past because they're so glaring and they're so emotional and they're so necessary for some level of attention. It can be at that uncomfortable intersection where homelessness meets mental illness and poverty, and how, as elected officials, do you try and address issues for people who need help? Many of them are not in a position to help themselves, and so what is the responsibility of the public sector, and what is the responsibility of the private sector? And all of us, I think, believe in historic preservation. No one wants to see boarded up old buildings in an urban core that once time had a lot of vitality. Certainly no one wants to start tearing down buildings that had once served a viable purpose in a community. There are health issues that can always be addressed in any community. There's typically not enough funding for very important things like education and the arts. And so every local community has to sort of deal with how they're going to address dealing with all these opportunities and necessary ingredients in having a complete city. And it's almost as if in Oklahoma City, we've had sort of this unspoken strategy that we would try to do is build an extremely strong economy and try and urge and encourage our faith-based communities and our philanthropists to try and help us address all of these other issues that we know are important, but are, for one reason or another, are more difficult for government to address. When you get to the social issues, that intersection I spoke of mental illness and homelessness and poverty, government is good when it can lay down a policy that applies to everyone and it makes sense and at some level serves a public good. But when you get into those social issues, those issues almost need to be addressed individually. Every one of the persons that's in that situation needs a single hand to reach down and help them up, a single voice to lend back some advice and some direction. Government's not necessarily good at that one-on-one connection, but faith-based organizations and philanthropists can help with all of that. And I think to a certain extent, when you look at how well I think we've addressed a lot of those social issues in this community, and then you look at how our business leaders have stepped up to help us address all of the issues that other cities face. And when you look at how we've become not just major league in sports, how we've become major league in the arts, and how we have continued to raise the level of what we expect out of our public education system. Yesterday, I was told that our inner city school district, the Oklahoma City Public School System, has now increased its population from 40,000 to 46,000 people. You should be very proud of that because it is extremely difficult to turn that trend around. And so when you start to see the density indicated and validated by all of our efforts to try and increase the population levels in the inner city to create more efficiencies for not only city government and its services, but also our public schools, you start to see that we're moving in the right direction. We have, our inner city district is the largest district in the United States with all-day pre-K. And I get back to what I talked about building a strong economy and encouraging our philanthropists and our faith-based groups to get involved, because the reason that we were able to put together that all-day, full-time pre-K throughout the district is because the Inasmuch Foundation donated millions of dollars to help make that happen as an effort. And so it's not just government in this community. The business sector continues to lead the way. And when you look back through our city's history, it's almost always been that way. Our generation inherited some incredible advantages on other nearby cities. When you look back and see that it was the business community that nearly 100 years ago went out into the rural areas of Oklahoma and started searching for corridors that would lead to transportation, that would lead today to us having 3 interstate highways that intersect in Oklahoma City. Look on a national map and try to find cities that have 3 interstate highways that pass all the way through and out the other side. There may be 1 or 2 others, but it's a very, very short list. It was the business community in Oklahoma City that went out and secured Tinker Air Force Base in the 1940s. Today, that's our largest employer. And when you start looking at the ways to diversify our economy, it's a lot easier when you have that Air Force Base, that workforce, and those large national aerospace companies already in town to get them to grow their presence in Oklahoma City. The diversification that's taking place in that industry alone is something that we should all be proud of. And the other thing that occurred was just over 100 years ago, and that is that we were named the state capital. And so the state capital brings with it a lot of government jobs, a lot of attention, legislators in town able to see the trials and tribulations of an urban core city. And so when you start to look at Oklahoma City and how we've progressed, keep in mind this institutional heritage that handed off to our generation so much opportunity. There are hundreds of communities around the country that wish they had the amount and sources of fresh water that we have going forward. We are set up not only to the middle part of this century with a plentiful supply of clean water, but we're now in the final stages of securing rights to handle our water needs probably till the end of this century. We're only able to do that and only able to be so forward-thinking because our predecessors were forward-thinking ahead of us. And so the opportunities that Oklahoma City appears to have are all about creating a city where people want to live, realizing that if you can attract people with choices, generally the recruitment takes place over highly educated 20-somethings because they're more mobile, but generally highly educated people with choices of all ages, to come to your city with the idea that an economy can grow because there's an educated workforce, because entrepreneurs want to be with other entrepreneurs, and the opportunities will be there for your economy to grow like never before. And there are a handful of situations out there that I think are worth a closer discussion, because a lot of times we talk about the economy and entrepreneurs and attracting people, and I would like to drill down just a bit and on a very superficial level just kind of touch on some other success stories that have occurred in exactly the manner we're talking about. If you go back to the 1970s, Michael Dell, the future computer guru, was growing up in Houston, Texas. Now, he was not someone who blossomed late. Michael Dell was always considered an extremely bright person. When he was in high school, he got a job with the Houston newspaper selling subscriptions. And so it was basically a cold call job. They handed you phone numbers and you called and just asked somebody if they wanted to subscribe to the paper. And if they did, you were paid a commission. Well, Michael figured out somewhere along the line that that was a very inefficient way of calling people, trying to get them to subscribe to the paper. So in his off time, he would go through the paper, find out who had recently married or who had recently moved to town. And he started calling his own list. And before long, Michael Dell, as a high school teenager, was making more money than his teachers at school with a part-time job on the telephone. So when a person of this intellect and entrepreneurship winds up at the University of Texas in Austin at the age of 18, he continues to be thinking from a completely larger scale. And if you know the story, Michael starts building computers in his dorm room. So he literally is buying kits and he's assembling computers and he's selling them to the other people in his dorm. And at some point his business grows and all of a sudden he realizes that it's become sort of a business with an opportunity to hire other people and to create this kind of a business where computers would be constructed and sold on a larger basis. Now, this is the critical part of the story that I want you to understand. Michael Dell is on the brink of becoming an entrepreneur. He grew up in Houston. He's now living in Austin. And he decides to build his business in Austin. Houston had every opportunity to create a positive image for Michael Dell as the best location to create his business. But for whatever reason, he chose the city of Austin. And in, say, 1980, Austin, Texas was a very medium-sized city. Did not stand out much on the state of Texas's maps other than being the state capital. Today, as you know, it has grown into a giant in the IT industry. Much of that is attributed to one person's decision not to go home, but to stay in Austin, Texas and create that business there. The quality of life in Austin, Texas obviously had enticed this young, talented person for one community over another. Now let's switch gears, go to a different part of the country, but a very similar timeline in a similar industry. Bill Gates grows up in Seattle. And as you know the story, he's a kind of a computer genius at a young age too. Bill goes off to Harvard, gets bored or decides that Harvard doesn't have enough to offer, leaves Harvard and goes and spends some time in Arizona, again kicking around this idea that there's going to be an opportunity going forward with not just the hardware of the computer industry, but the software of a computer industry. And Bill Gates decides at some particular point in this critical juncture of his life that he is going to launch a business. Does he stay in Arizona? Does he go back to Cambridge? He goes home. He goes back to Seattle and begins Microsoft. And so think of these two stories here. One grows up in a city and decides to start their business somewhere else. One grows up in a city, leaves, but comes back. The quality of life, whatever it was that brought them to that decision, created huge opportunities for the community that won the living rights, if you will, of that specific entrepreneur. Now, an anecdotal story about Oklahoma City. In 1920, we have a young person living just outside our metro area, just a little bit to the northwest. He's in his 20s. He's decided to try farming for a while, and so he comes to a rural area in our metro area and farms for several years just outside of Kingfisher. And at some point, it just isn't working out. Farming isn't what he thought it would be. Apparently, life in Kingfisher isn't what he was seeking, and he decides to go back home, and he moves back to southwest Missouri, northwest Arkansas, that area. But the key part of this story is he takes along his 2-year-old son. Sam Walton would become the richest man in the world and the largest retailer of the 20th century. And we had him. He was only 2. But we had every opportunity, just like Houston did with Michael Dell, just like Cambridge and Arizona did with Bill Gates. And so you start to get the idea that there's a little bit of randomness to this idea where huge opportunities can be created. One more anecdotal story about Oklahoma City. As you know, Aubrey McClendon grew up in Oklahoma City, went off to Duke, meets his future bride, Katie, and after college, they come back to Oklahoma City, but they've decided to relocate in Dallas because Aubrey has gotten a job as an accountant. Katie gets a job with Neiman Marcus, and they're about to leave Oklahoma City to begin their professional careers at a very young age in Dallas. And Aubrey's uncle says, well, if you're just going to be an accountant, as if completely dismissing the idea and vocation, why don't you come work for me in my energy company here in Oklahoma City? And Aubrey says, as he tells the story, says, well, you don't understand. They're going to pay me $21,000. No, I'm sorry. They're going to pay me $17,000 a year. That was the enticement to move to Dallas, a job that paid him $17,000 a year. And his uncles recounted, well, I'll pay you $21,000. And Aubrey says, deal. They don't go to Dallas. They start the 1980s in Oklahoma City. The energy company that Aubrey worked for, his uncle's company, didn't make it past the Penn Square and the energy issues. But by then, Aubrey is sort of planted as a young married couple in Oklahoma City, and he never leaves. And you know the legends of the job creation that has occurred since and continues in his life. And so you can't help but wonder what sort of entrepreneurship is currently in our city. And it falls back upon us to make sure we nourish everything we can, because you don't really know. You can't really handpick which individuals are going to make a huge difference inside of a community. We do know that many, many people left in the 1980s, many people with promising futures, but perhaps with an advanced degree, and the job market being what it was in the 1980s, there weren't opportunities for everyone that wanted to stay, and so many, many people left. One of the best advantages of having a strong economy and extremely low unemployment like we do is that the young people that want to stay in Oklahoma City today have that opportunity. And the Census Bureau is tracking a lot of relocations, and we see young people, highly educated people, moving here from Texas and moving here from California. There's a difference, though, in the way Oklahoma City's largest job creators built their businesses and the way many businesses are built today. When you go back and you look at several of Oklahoma City's businesses, it was started by one or two people. It was started by a father and a son with Devon Energy. It was started with a couple of friends in Tom Ward and Aubrey McClendon. It was started with a family in the case of Hobby Lobby or Loves. And what's interesting about each of those entrepreneurs that have grown incredibly large businesses is that they always intended, or seemingly always intended, to continue to grow inside of Oklahoma City and have a large, stable business. And I say all that because today when you talk about entrepreneurship on the MBA level and you're discussing it in schools and you're seeing how it works, it typically follows some model like this. There's a guy or a couple of guys who develop a patent. It might be some sort of chemistry from the pharmaceutical industry. It might be some sort of IT solution, but generally there's some sort of idea generation. And with that idea generation, they go looking for funding. And so there are people out there who fund such ventures, and although there's a lot of different ways to do it, generally there's some sort of deal put together that this idea will continue to be nurtured, and then perhaps existing funding will have to come later. But for whatever reason, this funding is going to make this a viable product, and we'll see where it goes from there. But in almost every one of those situations, the funders want an exit strategy. They want to know when they're going to get their money back. And the entrepreneurs typically will sell out to a larger organization at some point. It is very, very difficult to get from stage A to B to C and to stay in place and continue to stay in control of an idea, because the funding mechanism always seems to have a little bit more of a power play. And at some point, the people with the idea get pushed aside. What's interesting about the largest businesses in Oklahoma City, those that I mentioned a while ago, it appears that none of them ever had an exit strategy. Every single one of them wanted to grow and be a force, be a powerful organization, do more for the public good, and eventually the philanthropy that has resulted from all of that is very, very impressive. So one of the challenges for Oklahoma City and the rest of the country is, how do you adapt to what is sort of a new economy on the way that these businesses are grown? I heard recently of a specific example of how one business grew from conception to reality. Two guys in their 20s came up with this idea. And because they didn't have any money, and they didn't have quite the IT expertise to pull off the idea, they did what almost anyone would do. They found a 16-year-old who knew how to do it. So they find this 16-year-old who can write the code to create their idea. So now, with this idea, these two 20-somethings go looking for funding. And where do they go? They go to people that are in their 40s and 50s. So that group of people decides, yes, this is a good idea. We like the business plan. We're going to fund your idea. And so the 20-somethings are ecstatic. Their business is now relative. They can't wait to go out and run this company. And then the funders break the bad news to them, and that is, but you guys aren't going to run it. We got a couple of guys in their 30s that we want to run it. And so look now at this, the intergenerational chain of this specific example. Guys in their 20s create the idea. A guy in his teens had to write the code. People in their 40s and 50s had to supply the money, and people in their 30s had to take the company and run with it. The idea of one person creating all of those steps is extremely rare, especially when you start getting into IT and pharmaceutical and things that take a lot of research and money to get from point A to point B. In Oklahoma, we've long known that we've been kind of a series of extremes. The other day, I was watching one of our television meteorologists, and they explained where we were on a year-to-year basis with our what they call the normal rainfall. And Oklahoma's normal rainfall was this, and we were here. And then they added in something that I thought was interesting that I guess I knew, but I hadn't really thought about. But they said, but Oklahoma's never average. We have an average rainfall. Numerically, you have to have an average rainfall, but it's either almost very dry or very wet in Oklahoma. And I got to thinking, you know, it's almost like our economy. I mean, if you go back and look at Oklahoma City's economy and the state of Oklahoma's economy back since 1889, it's the same way. We're either in the best of times or we're in the worst of times. And when you start looking at the architecture that still exists in this building, or in this city, it almost reflects the best of times. When there was opportunities, when people were willing to invest in those best of times, is when some of the best architecture emitted, and so it comes in different stages. We're in one of those stages now, where some incredible architecture is starting to come out. We saw examples of it today. And I remember standing on this very stage. It must have been the 2004-2005 Roundtable, because I had not been in office very long, but we had completed the MAPS projects. The last one, the library, had finally opened in the summer of '04. And it seemed to me that we had all of the building blocks for incredible, rapid growth. And I looked around, and it wasn't happening. There were a couple of things going on, but the level of investment that I thought that should be building new housing, new businesses, new towers didn't seem to be coming. And so I stood at this microphone and I said, let's go. Because I knew I had a room full of developers and bankers. And after that, when I would run into people in those vocations, I would talk to them about my frustration about it just didn't seem to be happening. You know, we seemed in the public sector to have addressed so many of the needs of revitalizing the core of the city. And we had our high schools from Maps for Kids under construction. You could see all of this incredible investment going on, but there was a tendency to just look around and want somebody else to go first. And I thought it interesting because I saw Dick Tannenbaum here this morning, and I remembered Dick was one of the first to jump in. Dick, as I recall, it was the Montgomery first, but decided to invest in taking an old building and turning it into downtown housing. Believe me, that was a novel idea at the time that he was doing it. And I thought it was interesting that our conservative nature here was largely based on those life experiences. We had been through those tough times in the 80s. We'd been through the emotional impact of the Oklahoma City bombing in the 1990s. Dick didn't have those life experiences. He was willing to jump in. The very conservative nature that was keeping our banks from lending money to developers who might want to tiptoe into a project was so pervasive that it was almost imperative that somebody else go first. And you can't really blame the bankers because bankers want a track record. You know, they want an example of how this is going to work and how it's flourished. And that example, it's helpful if it's not somewhere else. Bankers want comps. You know, they want to be able to compare it to some other deal. And in Oklahoma City, we had gone so long without exciting, highly designed visual projects that there was a tendency to just sit back and see if this was for real, if this was really going to happen, if all of our hopes and dreams were really going to come true. And so here we are. We're, in the spring of 2014. We have over 500 people now coming to these events. You heard the ideas this morning. You heard entrepreneurs who are jumping in with both feet. And I hope you also will feel and sense the pride that and share in it at how we've been able to address a lot of those issues that confront every city that I've talked before, the social issues, the arts, how we're going to build that economy. Because that has come from the private sector realization what's going on in Oklahoma City is very, very real. And the challenge for us, I think, is to keep it going as long as we can. If you've been in Oklahoma very many years, you know it doesn't last forever. And if you look around the country, you know every city has its day. Well, this is ours. And we want to believe that all of the diversification efforts that we've made in our economy have been helpful and will help us weather the downturn if and when it eventually comes our way. But we also understand that in an ever-changing economy, that the energy business seems like one of the strongest sectors in the world. And the technology aspect that's now being applied to the energy sector is almost replacing that cavity we've always had in not having enough IT jobs and positions in large enough sector. It's almost as if the energy sector is moving into an IT region all of its own, and you see that with GE coming in here and building its park in the research center. So I mentioned this was just a collective of thoughts and ideas. But I thought somewhere in here were some ideas that you could pull from this room today and the energy that's in this room today and realize that what we have, what we've created, we should be very, very protective of, but we should also be very, very confident of, because we have raised a next generation of people that I believe are going to take this city well beyond what we've been able to do with it. So thank you all for coming today.
I wanted to talk briefly about the history of the award we're about to present. At the Mayor's Development Roundtable, the last 5 years, we have presented an award for outstanding development. And in the past, we have honored the Skirvin Hotel, the Presbyterian Health Foundation. We honored Bricktown. We've honored Devon, Chesapeake, not only for its campus, but also for Class and Curve. We have honored Midtown. And so this is the 7th year that we are presenting the award for outstanding development. And the 2014 award is going to the Plaza District. In the 1920s, a little history coming up here, a commercial niche formed along Northwest 16th Street between Blackwelder and Indiana Avenues. This development was in a response to the area's location at the end of the trolley line, as well as the growth of residential neighborhoods in the area. With the addition of the Plaza Theater in the mid-1930s, the area became known as the Plaza District. Now, the Plaza Theater was Oklahoma's first air-conditioned theater, and the district flourished from the 1930s to the 1970s. It served the neighborhood's needs with groceries and drugstores, cleaners, retail, and a variety of services, all within walking distance. However, as took place in many places around the country, considerable changes occurred in the 1970s through the 90s, and the area began a slow and steady decline. Population demographics shifted, the commercial area diminished, the crime rates rose. By the mid-90s, the district had become such a blight on the neighborhood that a group of residents began meeting and brainstorming on how they could improve the area. And this was the beginning of the success story. Through those meetings, they formed the Plaza District Association with a mission to restore the Plaza District. They believe the people and merchants of a neighborhood can become masters of their own destiny. They can shape their own physical, economic, and social environment. The first step was a pledge to stay and fight for the good of the neighborhood. In 2000, the first major step in the Plaza District's survival was marked by the purchase of the historic Plaza Theater and the former Humpty Dumpty grocery store by Lyric Theater of Oklahoma. The vision was to see the buildings restored and expand their operations to year-round theater programming. This major step fueled the Plaza District Association to work with the city of Oklahoma City to implement a streetscape project along Northwest 16th. That was funded in the 2000 GO bond issue, and it was completed in 2003. Meanwhile, Lyric Theater of Oklahoma's leadership launched a successful $10 million capital campaign for the renovation of the properties. The purchase of the theater, the completion of the streetscape started attracting new investments in commercial buildings on 16th. The Everything Goes dance studio opened in 2005, while Jeff Struble, a residential developer, purchased his first commercial property. And Keith Reinerson, Tarina Self, and Estrella Evans purchased properties as well. Over the next few years, many of those spaces were renovated and converted into mixed use with hopes to attract artists to live and to work. In 2007, Lyric at the Plaza opened its doors of new life as the anchor of the Plaza District. Recently renovated properties became available for lease. It started attracting young artist couples like Dylan and Amanda Bradway, who opened DNA galleries. They lived there, they worked there. Then the Plaza District Association hired local artist Kristen Vales, charged her to connect the young artist community to the district, and slowly but surely spaces along 16th Street began to fill with enthusiastic, creative people looking to make a living off making art and selling and starting new businesses. There were grassroots marketing and social media and other events. Slowly, they started attracting a small audience to support the businesses. Lyric Theater started bringing in shows and brought in visitors from across the city. They created events like Live on the Plaza and the Plaza District Festival, and it showed that the community had a spark of energy that had cultivated throughout the city. By 2010, there was a good variety of retail shops, artists, studios, and services, but there was still no restaurant. So capitalizing on the potential, Saints Pub opened in 2010, serving lunch. Momentum continued in 2012. The Mule Restaurant opened in the ground floor of a former Section 8 apartment building. It attracted droves of customers looking to enjoy their hot melts and their cold brews. The restaurant market was now proven, and in comes Amy Anpatone and district friend Steve Mason, who formed the Sweet 16th LLC, and they created DNA Galleries, the Pie Junkie, the Empire Slice House. In 2014, David Wanzer purchased the Blair's Upholstery Building for new tenants, and you saw that Roxy's Ice Cream and the craft beer restaurant Okanor are coming. Plaza District has been a 501c3 since 1997, but over the last 17 years, the district has risen out of intolerable crime and disrepair into a hub of creativity and a haven for local businesses. A neighborhood once threatened is now thriving. The historic businesses have been renovated for creative uses. The work of that association that first started in living rooms and then went out on weekends and started pulling weeds and then started dragging friends to a street festival has now blossomed with over $17 million in investment, 32 thriving businesses, property values on the rise, crime rates falling quickly, and perhaps most importantly, it has become a tight-knit community of artists, neighbors, and local businesses. They have accomplished this work through focused efforts in building capacity for the organization, promoting the district, and have a dedicated board of directors, a visionary group of business owners and volunteers. But at the heart of this is a community that worked with its local government and making the Plaza District a place where people wanted to be. I'd like to thank the Commercial Real Estate Council for sponsoring the fabrication of this award, and please join me in recognizing the Plaza District and its Executive Director, Kristen Vales.
Thank you, Mayor Cornett, for this wonderful honor. Kevin Durant really set the bar for acceptance speeches yesterday, and I'm no Kevin Durant, but I am very humbled to accept this award on behalf of the Plaza District Association, the shops, the property owners, neighbors, and volunteers that have helped make the Plaza District what it is today. The Plaza District is a wonderful example of true grassroots revitalization, and it all started because a group of neighbors decided that they were going to do something. Their first decision was a decision to stay and become masters of their neighborhood's destiny. I'm so thankful that generation before me had the vision to do something. Because of their vision, Lyric at the Plaza now hosts 97 performances, bringing 15,000 people to the district each year. Because of their vision, 35 entrepreneurs are making their dream business a reality, and because of their vision, 500 artists have had the opportunity to create, sell, perform, and learn in the district. The Plaza District's comeback story is a great one, but it's the stories that happen in the district every day that make it matter. A Lyric student has their first big role, a grandson gets a tattoo to honor a grandparent, a high school band plays their first show, friendships are made, ideas are born. I met my husband in the Plaza District. I got married in the Plaza District. Every day at the district is a scene for stories that make up the fabric of this wonderful community. 6 years ago, we started Second Friday live on the Plaza. Our attendance was just our group of friends hanging out, looking at art, and listening to music. One Friday night, I spotted a couple walking through the district with a stroller, and I had to run to my office to get a camera to document that someone was actually bringing their kids to the district after dark. This Friday at Live on the Plaza, I will be wading through a sea of strollers and families out enjoying the district on an evening. Above my desk hangs a photo of the district in 1933. A bakery, a barber, cleaners, an ice cream shop are just a few of the many shops that served the neighborhood for years. At our 2010 Urban Pioneer Awards luncheon, honoree Bill Ross recalled his fond memories of growing up in the district. He worked down the street at the hardware shop and would save up 5 cents to take a girl to the ice cream shop for double-dip cones. It was a time when the district had everything you needed, and it was a time when you knew everyone on the street. There's something extra special about our recent announcement that the district will once again have an ice cream shop. It's that the district has finally become a reflection of that 1933 photo in our own way. Of course, it's many community leaders, volunteers, businesses, artists, and residents that have built it back up to what it is, but the addition of the ice cream shop is the cherry on top. There are so many to thank for the progress, but I'd like to thank a few here today that have played a huge part in the story. Susan Hogan, Jeff and Amy Struble, Amy Apatone, Steve Mason, Amanda Badway, Lindsay Zadro, the leadership of Lyric Theater, Lou Kerr, Jonathan Fowler, Kayla Lewis, and special thanks to the City of Oklahoma City's support through the Commercial District Revitalization Program, and Kim Cooper Hart for helping districts like ours rise again. Again, we're so thankful for this recognition and award, and we're excited to be a part of all that is happening and growing in our great city. Thanks.